You wake to a room so dark it swallows your breath. Not city dark with sodium haze and sirens in the distance. Real dark. The you could reach a tone, touch it kind. Smoke fingers through the chinks in the logs, and the cold presses up from the dirt floor like a living thing. Outside, the forest is a held breath, oaks and hemlocks thrown against the stars. The kind of quiet that amplifies every crack and whisper. Elias Walker lies absolutely still and listens. He has learned that listening is half of staying alive. There a soft thud in the lean-to, the milk cow shifting, then the thin wire whine of wind along the eaves, then closer a brittle glitter of ice settling from the roof. He exhales and his breath ghosts the air. "Lydia," he whispers. A hand finds his in the dark, calloused, warm. "I'm awake." Her voice is steady, but he hears the calculation in it. Wood left by the hearth. 2 armfuls, meal in the barrel. Maybe a week. Salt pork, a slab and a prayer. The baby turns beneath her blanket, and the cabin's 3 lives take a synchronized breath. Frontier cabins don't creak like storybooks say they complain. The green pine, Elias, cut in August, still shrinks and twists in winter cold, opening. Gaps that he stuffs with clay and moss by day and curses by night. The door is 2 slabs pinned with wooden pegs. The hinges are rawhide. Everything is improv and gamble. Fire's low. Lydia says. Elias pushes free of the blankets, finds the hearth with his knees, and coaxes the coals with a split of oak. Sparks leap. For a heartbeat the room appears. A peg rail with 2 shirts. An address, a table planed from a storm-thrown maple. A 3-legged stool, a Dutch oven, a Bible with a rag marker, a powder horn that might as well be a second heart. On a rafter, strips of venison stiffen in the draught. On the wall, his rifle hangs within reach not. A movie prop, but a tool with rules. Keep it dry, keep it clean, count your shots like days. The log, Elias adds, is stingy with flame, but heat is a slow habit, it will come. He rubs his hands, thumbs, the powder pan on the rifle, and listens again. The forest has resumed breathing. A wolf offers a long opinion from the ridge. Another answers from the creek. "I'll check the cow," he says, and Lydia's hand tightens. "Take the bell," she says. The small iron triangle they bought back in Virginia carries farther than a shout. And in this new country, you announce yourself to everything bare neighbor. Stranger so, there are no misunderstandings. He pulls on his hunting shirt and cap, lifts the latch, and lets the night in. Cold takes him by both cheeks. His eyes prickle and water. The little clearing glows under a skin of hoarfrost, and every brittle weed shines. He steps into snow so powder fine it whispers dot the linter, smells like warm animal and old hay. He checks. The cow first, lays a palm against her flank, watches for that dumb, trusting eye. The chickens rustle, small feathered furnaces with dinosaur hearts. He scatters cracked corn, counts beaks, makes a note to fix a gap in the wattle fence when the sun is up. The thought feels absurd. The sun is a rumor in this cold. When he straightens, a shadow moves at the tree line, no sound, only a shift where the black meets the less black. Elias holds the breath he was about to waste and lets his hand settle on the rifle, not lifting, just letting his fingers remember what they've practiced. Another shape joins the first, then a third. For a beat, Elias imagines a wolf pack measuring the distance between hunger and the cow. Then the shapes resolve. Men far enough to be ideas, close enough to change everything. Elias does what the older men back on the valley road. Taught him, he does not raise the rifle. He raises his empty hand, palm out, and steps so his body is between the cow and the tree line. He reaches back for the bell's rawhide thong and lets it speak, gentle once, twice sound, carrying across. The eyes stare like a thread. The men at the trees do not flinch. One lifts his hand in mirror, the other to shift, silent as shadow. They stand a long time, the way winter makes all moments longer. The leader tips his head not to Elias, but to the sky end, then they melt back into the dark. He waits until the wind remembers to move again. Then he goes inside. Men, he says, voice flat with cold. Lydia is already sitting up, pulling on her shawl. She doesn't ask what kind. In this place, men is not a category. It's a question mark. Get the kettle on, she says. If they come in daylight, we meet them with steam, not smoke. And Elias hears the wisdom in it. Hospitality here isn't softness. It's a safer first move than a trigger. They eat corn mush and share a rabbit Elias took yesterday. Lydia salts the bones for stock and sets a pot where it will sulk all day. The baby kicks like a drummer in a tavern band, and Lydia smiles because toughness is not a thing you talk about out. Here, it's just what you do when the light finally blues the window shutter. Elias straps the rifle and steps toward the door again. Keep close, Lydia says. I'll walk the ridge, set to snares, be back by high. He doesn't say, if. I'm not back, the cow is yours. The axe is under the bench. The neighbors are a mile and a stubborn hope away. He doesn't have to. Lydia knows where every tool lives and who she becomes if he doesn't return. The ridge is a tangle of laurel and stone. The air cuts clean. Elias moves like a man who has learned the choreography of careful eyes, then foot, then breath. He reads the ground the way his father read Ledger's tiny script, hard numbers. Here, a rabbit print, neat as a stamp. Here, a fox's long loop of curiosity. Here, a smudge where deer paused to think like a deer. He sets 2 snares on a run, thumbs the knots as if they could remember his hand, then works along the spine of the ridge to a small bluff where he can see their clearing below. The cabin looks like a child's block set the forest forgot. Smoke rises thin and white. For all its fragility, it is theirs. When he turns to leave, a figure is there, as if the trees had a secret door. The man is his age, or maybe an age the winter makes of everyone rawhide and patience. He holds a gun, but not at Elias. Elias does the math quickly. One man you see means others you don't. He moves his rifle slowly, lowers it so its butt touches the snow. The other man watches his hands, then his eyes. He lifts 2 fingers and draws them across his chest, a line that means peace in some camps and listen in others. He tilts his chin toward the valley and makes a cutting motion. Not throat, trail. Elias sees it. A dead ash leaning into another, a winter week hinge that will fall across the path they both use to reach the creek when the next wind decides. Elias nods. He mimics the motion with his hand, points to his axe, points to the ash, then lifts his palms together. The man considers a fraction, then gives the smallest nod a face can make. On the way down the ridge, they do not speak. They move like 2 lines of a story that do not cross until they absolutely must. At the ash, they take turns with the blade, cutting where the wood shows a seam. The other man cutting where a hunter reads weight and balance. The tree goes with a wheeze and a grunt and a final snow-shaking thump. They hew a stair through the crown so the trail won't snag. work until breath steams and first sweat freezes in their shirts. When the path is clear, they stand on opposite sides of what used to be a problem and is now just firewood in the wrong place. Elias, he says, finally, touching his own chest. Names are gifts. Out here, you offer them carefully. The other man touches his chest. See, he says. Slow enough to teach. Elias tries it. Chili. The man's face warms a degree, a smile that doesn't move his mouth so much as relax his eyes. He points to the ridge, traces a line in the air. Storm. Then he points to Elias, then toward the cabin. Go. Elias nods. He points toward the cabin. Door and mimes, steam lifting from a kettle. Lifts a hand the way Lydia does when she is saying, "Come when you are ready, not when I am." The man listens to the gesture, then touches 2 fingers to his forehead and is gone between one blink and the next. Elias stands alone on the trail a long second, heart competing with the cold, and then he goes home. By midday, the sky has that pale metal look that says the next hours belong to the wind. Lydia is already 5 steps ahead. The extra logs are stacked inside to dry. A biscuit of tallow waits in a bowl to fill the cracks that will open when the temperature drops again. She's boiled the rabbit bones into a broth that tastes like memory and added a cut of corn mush to give it body. This is frontier luxury, not flavor that dazzles, but warmth that argues the cold out of your hands. He tells her about the ridge and the ash and the man. Will he come? Lydia asks. If he wants to, Elias says, and they both know that in this country, want is a word with 100 uses. By afternoon, the wind is a tool the forest uses to test every joint. The cabin answers back with its own small language tick. Of sap, click of frost, the wet cough of a log deciding to be flame. Snow begins not as flakes, but as a dry hissand from a white ocean. The world narrows to the arc of heat around the hearth. At dusk, the bell speaks, to notes, polite, the way you would knock on a neighbor's door in a place that has only just remembered it can have neighbors. Lydia lifts the kettle to the side of the fire and wipes her hands on her apron. Elias lays a palm on the rifle and then removes it, counts to 5, and goes to the door. He lifts the latch and lets in the night. TSI-Lee-C stands in the threshold, hat rim patchy with snow, eyes shining a little with wind. Behind him, farther back and half hidden the way they are taught, 2 others wait, one older, one a boy with a face built to remember everything. Elias steps aside. Lydia steps forward. She gestures to the hearth and then to the bench, then to the kettle, and finally to a place on the floor where a bowl and a spoon are waiting. For a second, all 4 adults measure each other in the economy of this place. Then Silisi tips his head and enters. He lays his gun on the pegs by the door, the way a man takes off his hat in a church. The older man follows, then the boy, who can't help watching everything. If you are waiting for the tense movie scene raised voices, sudden moves, you will be disappointed. What happens instead is the slower thing nations rarely learn. 3 men and a woman agree that winter is a bigger enemy than either of their names. Lydia hands bowls as if they were treaties. The men wrap both hands around the heat and accept them as if they were. No one wastes words. The wind does enough talking for everyone. TSI-Lee-C looks around the cabin the way a carpenter reads joints. His eyes rest on the smoke-blackened beam above the hearth. He stands, touches the beam, and taps at a spot with his knuckles. then mimes a split with his hands and shakes his head. Elias understands. Greenwood over fire will check and crack. Wedge in a brace, or one night the beam becomes the fire. Elias nods, grateful and a little embarrassed. Lydia's mouth quirks. She will not say I told you so, but the air is full of it when the bowls are empty. The older man, who has not spoken, pulls from his pouch a twist of something that smells like cedar and winter berries. He lays it on the hearthstone with a gesture that has the weight of offering, nods to Lydia, and touches his chest in thanks that needs no translation. The boy watches Lydia's hands as she tidies the bowls, and watches Elias's hands as he checks the priming on the rifle, and watches the door as if it were a second kind of fire. He is learning the choreography too. Snow stacks against the shutter. The room shrinks to fire and breath and the slow creak of log and leather. When they leave like they came, politely, with that belltone of bodies moving through. Cold. Elias closes the door and leans his forehead against the raw wood for a beat. Lydia banks the coals for the night, building tomorrow's morning carefully, not too much, not too little, just enough spark to argue dawn into flame again. Was this worth it? She asks, not a complaint, a ledger. Elias looks at the beam. Celici tapped at the place where frost is sneaking in around the shutter, at the cradle against the wall and the rifles on the pegs. Ask me in spring, he says, and she smiles, because this is how hope survives winter, not as a speech, but as a chore you will do again tomorrow. He reaches under the bench for the brace he will cut in the morning, and for the first time since leaving Virginia, he doesn't feel like a trespasser in his own life. The door is a door. The world outside is not empty. It is occupied with weather, with neighbors, with debts and favors and warnings that come as taps on beams and motions of hands. The wind leans on the cabin leans back. Somewhere beyond the trees, wolves argue their old argument. Inside, a baby makes a sound like a small bird in a warm nest. The frontier sells itself as freedom. Elias is starting to learn it is responsibility you choose on purpose. Every day you wake up where the map used to stop. Asterisk, the river is a road that doesn't care where you're going. At dawn, it looks calm. A long sheet of hammered pewter sliding between black trees. By noon, it shows teeth whirlpools and snags, drifting logs that look sleepy until they stand up like spears. By night, it talks in many voices, low mutters under the banks, slap of small waves against planks, far-off thunder that might be weather, or might be the river remembering old storms. Jonah Walker stands at the stern sweep and reads that language, the way his uncle Elias taught him to read tracks in the snow. Slow pressure to starboard, a whisper of current from a side channel, a log turning broadside. Give it room. He keeps the flatboat steady as a plough horse, and the boat obeys because it knows he's listening. On the deck, everything the walkers own is lashed under canvas, a chest with the family Bible and 2 quilts, a barrel of cornmeal, a sack of seed, a cradle Lydia insisted they bring, though Ruth won't need it for months, a small crate of tools, and a bell. They use the way folks use a door knock back east, polite warnings launched into the dark. Hold tight, Tess, Ruth says, bracing their 4-year-old with her hip while she pours coffee. Ruth's belly is round with the next one summer. If God is kind. She has river hands now. Quick, sure, burned once and then never again. Coffee's hot. Jonah grins. You make it strong on purpose so I can't sleep and drift us into Kentucky. As if Kentucky would take you, Ruth says, and Tess giggles, because this is how Jonah and Ruth keep fear in its place, make it into a joke small enough to carry. They aren't the only ones heading west. The Ohio is thick with life this spring of 1803, flatboats like their own, long lean keelboats poling upstream, rafts that are nothing but wishful thinking and rope, and one's a painted pirogue ghosting along the bank like a fish on top of the water. Folks on shore wave from landings that are barely landings. Men in shirt-sleeves shout advice nobody asked for. News rides the current as fast as any boat. Jefferson bought the whole middle of the continent from the French, from the Spanish, from whoever claimed it last. Double the nation, they say, or double the trouble. Everybody laughs because it's easier than arguing treaties none of them have seen. They tie up under Cincinnati to buy salt, and hear a man with ink-stained fingers shout headlines from a hand press. A Louisiana purchase you can't fold in a pocket. A president accused of buying mystery. A world where half the maps are rumors. A slick fellow calls himself a land agent and wants to sell them a future at a premium. Your best ground is already spoken for, he says with a smile that never reaches his eyes. Ruth thanks him so politely he thinks it's agreement. Jonah watches the way his wife sets the folded bill of sale down on the counter and leaves it there like a snake she won't pick up. They buy nails, a bit of lamp oil, and a paper with last week's weather dressed up as news, then push off before the city's noise gets in their bones and won't come out. Downstream, the river turns wide and slow and then quick again. Cottonwoods comb the wind. The banks carry stories you can't help seeing. A cabin's thin smoke, 3 pigs rooting in leaf litter, a woman hauling water with a yoke and a rhythm that means she's done this with sore shoulders and without complaint. On a bluff a ring of stumps gleams white as teeth, the first field of someone's grandson. Tell me about river monsters, Tess demands. Which is Walker, for I'm scared of the log with the eyes. River monsters love little girls who ask too many questions, Jonah says. They swallow them whole and then spit them out again because the questions tickle. Tess scrunches her nose. Monsters don't laugh. Maybe not, Ruth says, handing her a hunk of cornbread. But I do when your father tells lies. They make a fire on a gravel bar and boil water because fever rides the flatboats, same as hope. Folks call it ague, the shakes, the kind that makes a strong person small. Jonah keeps coffee boiling because coffee's safer than river water, and because the smell tells. Neighboring boats friendly here, but not foolish. In the second week, they tie off to a sycamore scarred with old cut marksy names and years, and whatever a knife can say. At moonrise, a skiff slips from a cut bank, low and fast. 2 men, no lantern. Hoe the boat, one calls. Our mother's dying on shore. We need a ride to the preacher. Ruth's eyes flick to Jonah's hands. The bell is within reach. The rifle behind the barrel. Jonah doesn't move for either. He moves his voice. I'm sorry for your mother. He says, we'll send word to the next boat. They've got a skiff and 4 strong men who can make speed. Our mother's dying, the man repeats, and the boat nudges closer. The second man doesn't speak. He watches how rope hangs, how knots lie, how the sweep could be taken if a man was quick and the wind agreed. Jonah lifts the bell and lets it sing twice. The sound carries like a bright coin on the dark. Upstream, a keelboat answers with an oar slapped flat on water a-deep, heavy note like a door closed. From the far bar, another bell. The river community wakes itself in a chain, boat to boat. The The skiff hesitates, calculates, and ghost slips back to shadow. Ruth exhales the breath she hadn't let him see she was holding. "We'll pray for his mother," she says, "and for his next idea," Jonah adds. And they both let the fear go the way the skiff went down the cut, out of sight, not forgotten, just filed. The days drop like stones. The current fattens, brown and strong. The air tastes different, warmer, heavier with what the big river knows. They come around a bend and the world opens, the Ohio sliding into the Mississippi like a smaller animal into a larger one. The colors don't match. The waters don't agree. They braid and argue and then, miles later, become one big thought. "It looks angry," Tess whispers. "It's just bigger," Ruth says. Big things aren't always angry. On the Mississippi, they see fields that don't belong to the people working them. Rumor was abstract on the Ohio. Here it's a line of human backs in a cotton row and a man on a horse who doesn't work, but still sweats. Ruth watches and doesn't speak. Later, when Tess is asleep, she says quietly, "I don't ever want our children to live in a world where someone is a tool." "No," Jonah says. He doesn't believe in swearing, so he says it again, with weight. "No." They leave the big river's spine as soon as they can, nose into a smaller tributary where the current is less proud, and follow it like a vein back into country that looks like the future could grow there. Illinois land, black and rich even, when it's just a smear on a boot heel. The bottoms smell like damp and promise. The oaks hold their arms up like men who volunteer. They pull the flatboat into a wedge of willows and let it settle. This is the kind of stopping that isn't a stop yet. Ruth climbs the bank and looks both ways and closes her eyes. "It sounds different," she says. "How? Not like travel, like work." They walk the nearest ridge, lay out imaginary corners with their hands. Here, a house, there a garden. Down the draw, a spring where frogs will scream in spring and save children from wandering too far. Jonah has never bought land on a paper in a city. He's never signed his name in front of a man with soft hands. He prefers the original contract. Can you survive here? Will you be useful? Will you take less than you give? The country signs with wind. They build the first shelter the way first shelters always get built, quick, ugly, stubborn. A half-faced camp, then a squared cabin with a flue, then a proper chimney stacked the hard way. Ruth stores seed in a clay jar. Tess is given a small job that matters: carry chips, sort kindling by size, be a person who helps. The days fill like a barrel. News still comes, but now it walks on two legs and stops to eat. A trader with a pack of knives and mirrors. A German family who play a fiddle and laugh in a language thick with R's. A Shawnee man who doesn't smile and doesn't have to. His gaze is a question, Jonah answers by keeping his fences off the creek where deer still drink. They learn their neighbors the way you learn a river bend. Who can mend a wheel in an afternoon? Who can deliver a baby when time and body disagree? Who drinks too much on market day and comes home sorry? At night, after they bank the fire and Tess falls into sleep like dropping a stone in a pond. Jonah and Ruth count blessings and bullets and promise to never confuse the two. Then the river reminds them it is not a road. It is a geology. It's 1811, and winter is thinking about arriving early. Jonah is mending a trace by firelight when a sound comes like a wagon rolling over the roof. Except there is no wagon, and the roof lifts the way a fish lifts its gills. Ruth is on her feet before her chair falls. Tess jerks awake, eyes huge in a face that has never seen the ground move. What Tess begins, and then the floor ripples, a slow wrong wave that comes from the earth itself. The hearthstone pops, and the iron pot jumps and clatters on brick. Outside, wolves begin to sing, and then stop, because even a wolf doesn't know which song fits an earth that can't stand still. Jonah grabs Ruth and Tess and steers them under the doorbeam by instinct he didn't know he owned. The cabin groans. The brace Elias told him to set 2 summers ago keeps the best log from deciding to become fire. The shaking pauses and then returns. A long rolling heave, like the country is trying to remember a different shape. From the river comes another sound lower, stranger, the groan of a giant animal that has been woken wrong. Jonah runs to the bank because he's a man who has to see. The water is boiling in places, flat in others, then suddenly rushing upstream as if it has changed its mind about downhill. Ruth is beside him before he can tell her to stay. Tess is in Ruth's arms because that is where the center is. Across the water, trees are throwing themselves down. A sandbar collapses, then stands again where it didn't exist. Birds spray into the night like sparks. The sky itself looks tilted. The river's noise is all the noises. Earthquake, Ruth says. But the word is small, and the event does not fit inside it. From downstream comes a lantern too, 3 bobbing like full fire. A raft is out on the main flow where no raft should be at night, pinned in a reverse current that makes no sense. In the lantern glare, Jonah sees the white of knuckles, the wild swing of a steering oar that will not bite, a woman with her hair loose and her jaw set, braced over a child who is not screaming only because terror has pulled sound out of him. Rope. Jonah shouts, and the word snaps the camp into a body. Neighbors appear as if grown from the riverbank, the German with the fiddle, the man who mends wheels, the quiet Shawnee hunter who doesn't waste time with introductions. 3 coils fly. The first misses, the second snakes over a stake, the third catches a cleat. The river tries to keep what it has. The men try to take it back. The line draws blood on palms. The earth shakes again. Ruth's lantern shows Tess's face, white and steady. The raft slews against the bank like a great fish refusing to be land. Hands grab hands. Children pass like buckets in a fire line. The woman with the hair loose steps onto ground and only, then allows her knees to tell the truth, then dash quiet, not silence. The frogs haven't found their voices yet, and the birds are still making wrong sounds. But the river has stopped arguing with itself and gone back to the business of downhill. The ground holds. The air is full of dust that smells like old stone. Somewhere a dog barks because that is what a dog can do. Jonah listens to the aftersound. Inside his own bones, the phantom motion that keeps you swaying after a boat has docked. Ruth sets a hand on his arm and doesn't remove it. Tess, who has seen too much for a child, and exactly enough for a frontier child, leans her head against her mother and falls asleep standing up. They will learn the name New Madridilator from a newspaper 3 weeks old, and from a peddler who tells it wrong and a surveyor who tells it right. They will learn that chimneys fell as far as Cincinnati and the Mississippi ran backward for minutes that felt like hours. They will learn there were more quakes, each with its own bad magic. They will tell the story for years, and the story will be true even when details drift like the river's eddies. For now, it is just night again. They bank the fire, soothe a stranger's child, check the beam above the hearth with a carpenter's eye and a prayer. The shaken earth holds the cabin. The shaken river keeps its path. In the dark, Jonah lies awake and listens. Even calm water has a voice. Tonight, it says, don't forget who is bigger. He won't. Asterisk lines on a map, 1820s Mu Yoitocentesi Trinkta Essi boomtowns sprout like corn. Treaties crack like ice. A surveyor's chain bites into lives it doesn't have to live. When a new line is drawn through an old hunting ground and across a family's field, the walkers learn that not all frontiers wear buckskin. Asterisk, the first time a chain crosses the walker place. Tess is 12 and thinks it's a snake. It glitters. Where the sun hits it, brass links, each one a precise lie about how tame land can be. To men unspool it with the care of surgeons and the impatience of men paid by the mile. Behind them comes a third with a tripod and a spyglass that looks like it could see to the moon. The instrument wears a spirit level like a little pond trapped in glass, a bubble that tells the truth better than most people do. Jonah wipes his hands on his trousers and walks out from the corn he's cutting for fodder. Ruth steps onto the porch with the baby on her hip. Caleb, all fists and opinions and an expression that says politeness is a tool, same as an axe. Morning, the chainman offers, cheerful as a peddler. County survey, township, range, section, setting corners for the plat book. Jonah nods. He knew this was coming. He's watched towns sprout along the river the way mushrooms take a field after rain. First a ferry, then a landing, then a store where whiskey costs less than lamp oil, then a church if a circuit rider gets there before the saloon builds a second porch. After that, a courthouse. Once there's a courthouse, you stop living by handshake and start living by paper. How far are you planning to cut? Jonah asks. Section line runs east to west, the man with the tripod says, peering into his device. You're on the north half of 31. County road will follow it. We'll mark a right-of-way road. Ruth repeats, because sometimes it helps to hear a word out loud before you decide what you think of it. Progress, the chainman says, meaning wagons and mail and speed and the price of land. He doesn't mean what will happen when the road's rut turns to a trench of February mud that steals oxen and boots, or how drunks will sing under your window at midnight because law goes soft where whiskey runs hard. The tripod man squints, adjusts, squints again. Set a stake here, he says, tapping a spot that isn't just a spot to Jonah. It's where Tess planted her first row of beans and cried when a rabbit ate the sprouts, and where Ruth buried the little black cat that came and stayed and then didn't. A corner, the instrument says. A memory the family knows. The men pound cedar. A square of the world accepts a nail and pretends it likes it. Got your deed? The chainman asks, like a man asks about a coat before the snow comes. Recorded at Kaskoskia, Jonah says, Oitenta acres bought proper. Good, the man says, and it is. Paper is the new rifle. You keep it clean and close. Jonah already learned that when a slick-haired fellow came a priver in a frock coat and offered to buy the South, 40 outright cash, he fanned like a card trick. TN then returned a month later with another man who said the first man never owned what he sold. Ruth's polite voice got them through that mess. We can go to the judge together, she'd said, like she was inviting neighbors to a pie social. We'll take our paper and you can take yours. The trickster left, quicker than he came. The surveyors move on, links gleaming, tripod blinking. By noon, the road is a line of stakes across the county, new as a scar. By sundown, stories ride it. A new store 2 miles east. A man named Yoda who shoos donkey carts from his porch with a broom. A lawyer no one trusts who can copy a deed with one eye shut. Tess watches it all with that hungry stare. Children on new ground get the one that says she understands that where you put a line decides who gets to stay. Boomtowns grow. In a decade the way trees do in a century. The county seat declares itself with a square and a whip of white paint across clapboard. A judge assumes a robe that is mostly dignity. The barber's chair doubles as a dentist's. The blacksmith is also a farrier and a pediatrician when he's had enough coffee. Saturday becomes a market. Eggs for calico, pork for nails, gossip for free. Ruth stands at a stall with her butter yellow, perfect, wrapped in muslin. She boiled herself and learns that news is a currency and doesn't always trade at face value. Did you hear? A woman asks, breathless from rumor and running. President Jackson signed a Lindians must remove West, all of them, for their own good. They say. Ruth's mouth goes tight. The Shawnee man who never smiled and never needed to, he has a name now. They call him Stone by Water because he sat on the same rock by the same bend, season after season, and knew more about the creek than men who claimed it. He stands at her butter stall once a month, trades smoked fish and a bundle of sweetgrass for salt and flour, and they talk the way people do when they need each other and words don't always fit. Where would they go? Tess asks that night, stirring the pot the way Ruth showed her slow circles so the corn doesn't catch. At 12, she is already taller than Ruth was at 16. Her mind is taller than her height. West, Jonah says, and the word feels like a river he doesn't want to ride. The government drew a line on a map and called it fair. Tess glances at the field stake in the yard, the one the chainman set and she tripped over in the dark. The one Ruth refuses to move because they didn't decide where it went, so they refuse to hide it. The world is becoming lines. Stone by Water returned the hunting rights we never owned. Ruth says, voice soft and flat, he let us keep what we took. We did not ask if he had the right to let us keep what was his. No one answers that. Some truths sit at the table and don't pass the salt. In 32, the rumors come on horseback. A Sauk leader named Black Hawk crossed the river with people and hope and seed corn. He says last spring's treaty is a trader's trick, a drunk's signature, a theft disguised as paper. The militia is called. Boys who used to race sticks in the creek now talk like veterans and march like stories. Join up, Walker, asks Ezra Pike, the blacksmith's cousin, and a man who has practiced the look of leadership in a mirror. Protect hearth and home. Make your mark. Jonah stands in the doorway of the new barn and rolls the idea in his hands. Hearth and home are right here, he says finally. I'll haul flour, shoe mules, ferry wounded. I won't go hunting families who came to grow corn. Pike's face hardens. You calling us hunters of families? I'm calling what I see, Jonah says, and he keeps his voice steady because anger is a poor carpenter. He ends up driving a team for the quartermaster, which means he sees the war from the side. The way camp news fattens, the way boys waste meat because fear makes people careless, the way women pack and carry and nurse while the newspapers call them angels so they won't have to call them workers. He sees worse. 2 burnt lodges, corn cut green and left to rot. A line of Sauk women. And children, stiff with miles and terror, chased by men who are more rumor than soldier. At the ford, a militia boy raises his gun at a woman whose hands are empty but for a toddler clamped to her hip like a second rib. Don't, Jonah says. The word is not a shout, it's a beam nailed across a door. The boy's eyes flicker. He never been told no by anyone he thought mattered. But he lowers the rifle because something in the way Jonah says it sounds older than the county later. When Black Hawk's band is broken and the survivors run west into swamp and history books. Ruth sits on the porch and mends a shirt torn by someone else's bramble. Tess, now 14 and taller still, copies the deed again by candlelighter, clean hand, every letter clear. Why are you writing it again? Caleb asks from under the table, where he is carving a small horse with a big head. Because paper gets lost, Tess says, and ink fades. And sometimes men take papers and then pretend they never did. But also because if I write our name enough times, maybe it will feel like it belongs to more than the paper. Ruth smiles at that. The girl understands what the surveyors didn't. Lines are only as strong as the people who honor them. In the new courthouse, a treaty spreads across a table like a river-sick map. The men point at colored blocks and talk like land is a checkerboard that will stay put if you don't breathe too hard. The judge taps a spot with a fingernail. This is the reservation, he says. This is the road. This is the quarter section you claim. Here, and his nail clicks on that stake Test tripped on last spring, is where the road and the reservation and your fence try to share the same inch of earth. The county will take a strip for public use. You will be compensated. Compensated. How? Ruth asks. With script redeemable at the county store. Ruth doesn't look at Jonah because if she does, he might laugh and then everything will get worse. We will accept justice, she says evenly. If you have some, the judge blinks. The lawyer winces. The clerk scratches the wrong line and has to sand it out. They all float in the current of a new era. Men who think writing is the same as right. On the walk home, Tess is a thundercloud. They move lines like they move toys. She fumes. On a table, with a finger. Men in rooms have done that since rooms were invented, Ruth says. Our job is to live with it without becoming like it, and to choose when not to. What does that mean? Caleb asks, trotting to keep up. It means if the county takes a strip of our land, we'll plant flowers on the edge to tell ourselves we're still here, Ruth says. It means we'll keep our fence out of the creek, because deer drank there before we needed rails. It means we'll trade with Stone Bywater, as long as there's a trade to make. And when they make him go west, we'll walk him to the river and stand with him until he can't see us anymore. They do exactly that. On a morning too bright. For the purpose, the Shawnee camp lifts in quiet. The women pack baskets with the efficiency of people who have packed for sadness before. Old men fold blankets that have seen more winters than any treaty. Children carry bundles that should be held by someone else. Stone Bywater stands by the bend where the creek tells stories to those who listen. He doesn't look at the water. He looks at the walkers. Ruth holds out a packet of salt wrapped in linen, and Tess offers a bone-handled knife she bartered for with 3 months of eggs. Stone Bywater accepts them as he would accept an apology if the world had ever offered him one of proper size. He touches his chest. He touches his forehead. He points west, then taps the ground where they stand, once, as if nailing a thought, to it so it won't blow away. Caleb blurts what everyone else swallows. Will you come back? The man considers, and his eyes do that small smile they sometimes do when a thing hurts, and he chooses not to show it the usual way. He shakes his head once, then he points to the creek into Caleb's chest, a line between them that does not need a surveyor. He goes, "The wagons grind a sentence no one wants to hear." The dust settles. The creek goes on telling its one long story. The 1830s hustle by like a man late to catch a boat. Canals are miracles on paper and trenches in person. The Illinois and Michigan Canal will connect to big waters, they say. It will pour the Great Lakes into the Gulf like a man tipping a barrel, and the little towns along it will wake up famous. In the tavern, a man with a hat too nice for mud drinks all night and sells shares in a company no one will be able to find by morning. Everyone's going somewhere, Ruth says, swinging a kettle off the hook. The question is whether they'll like who they are when they arrive. Tess laughs because she's heard her mother turn wisdom into one-sentence meals before, and because the boy who helps in the smithy is always looking at her like she already arrived. Letters pull the walkers. Eyes west. A cousin in Missouri writes on paper that smells like river and campfire, says a road of wagons leaves from Independence each spring Oregon country. He calls it like it's one field you can see across. He says the Willamette Valley grows wheat, up to a horse's belly, and that a man can claim more ground than he can walk in a day if he gets there before everyone else does. He says winter is rain, not knives. Summer is green, not fire. Stories, Jonah says. But he reads the letter twice and traces the loops of the far-off rivers with a forefinger that has measured lumber and furrows and rifle stocks and the space between a door and a wind that wants inside. Tess reads it too, lips moving, eyes climbing the page like a hill. What if the line we need isn't on the map yet? She asks. What if we have to draw it while we walk? Ruth gives her a look that holds pride and fear and the understanding that motherhood is letting your children walk toward a horizon you can't see. Then we pack the good spoons and leave the chair that breaks my back, she says, and we learn new rivers, and we make friends who know the names of winds in places we can't imagine. Jonah stands, goes to the yard, and sets his palm on the cedar stake the surveyor drove the year the road came. It's grey now, top split into a crown, but it stands. He leaves it. Not as a boundary, but as a memory of the day strangers hammered a corner into the world and called it official, and he learned to say, "This is ours," in a way the county could hear. He looks west. You can't see Oregon from Illinois, but you can feel the pull the way a fish can feel a river thinking about the sea. That night, the map comes out, the big one with creases like a farmer's palm. The lines look sure of themselves, the way ink does before boots and hunger get involved. Ruth sets a candle so it doesn't drip on the Missouri River. Tess puts a finger on Independence and leaves it there, as if touching the word could turn it into a door. Caleb leans close, breath, fogging mountains that someone who never climbed them drew by guesswork and hearsay. "What do we take?" he asks. "Less than we think," Jonah says. "More than we can carry." Asterisk, the long road west, 1843 to 1846. Oxen shoulder into mud. Cholera moves faster than wagons. At the Platte, the road splits into decisions. Nobody's old enough to make the walkers learn that on the Oregon Trail. The map is only the first promise you'll have to break. Asterisk, the road doesn't begin at the prairie. It begins at a chalkboard. Flour, 200 pounds per adult. Bacon, 150. Coffee, 10. Salt, 20. Rifles, powder, spare axles, spare tongues, spare patience. The outfitter in Independence, Missouri, writes fast, talks faster, and sells fastest. His chalk hisses as if the board itself disapproves of the arithmetic. Ruth watches his list grow like a sermon. Jonah watches the prices sneak higher than last week's. Tess traces the wagon's white canvas with a fingertip and pretends not to see the way the wind already wants it. Caleb runs a hand along the spoke of a brand new wheel and feels how a circle can hold a family if you keep it true. Oxen, says an old mountain man, leaning on the wall like a cautionary tale. Not mules, not horses. Oxen won't panic. When lightning comes down to bite, they'll put their heads in it and keep walking. Slow, someone complains. Alive. The old man replies. They buy 2 yoke of red Durham oxen with the faces of philosophers and the momentum of Sunday. Ruth counts sacks while Jonah argues nails. Tess chooses a Dutch oven with a lid that fits like a promise. Caleb pockets a whetstone and the advice that came free with it. A dull blade is an insult to work. On the first morning of May, they roll out with 100 other wagons into a mist that lifts like a curtain. Independence spits them into tall grass and rumor. The river behind them talks in its sleep. Ahead, the prairie breathes big one green note, sustained to the horizon. Keep the tongue straight, Jonah says, hands on the reins, voice equal. Part, instruction, and prayer. Ruth walks beside the near ox, palm on its shoulder, feeling the pull like a drumbeat she can follow. Tess rides the lead of the second yoke, boots braced, eyes scanning for gopher holes that can snap a leg and turn. A plan into a plea. Caleb checks the lashings on the bed and discovers the first law of the trail. Everything tries to work loose. By noon, the wagon-train has a spine, a captain elected by argument, scouts appointed by admiration, rules posted with bravado. No Sabbath. Travel, no loaded firearms in camp, boil your water even if you're late. Everyone nods. Everyone secretly thinks the rules are mostly for other people. They make 10 miles the first day and feel like conquerors. The second day, 6, the third. Day 12, and a broken yoke. Progress, it turns out, is never a straight line. The prairie is generous with grass and stingy with time. At the Big Blue they learn what ford really means. Cold up to the waist, mud to the knees, oxen that suddenly remember they are animals and not machines. The water presses like a crowd. A wagon loses its footing, tilts, rights, tilts again. A barrel pops loose and rolls away like a comic scene until someone says, "That was the flour." Laughter dies quick in wet boots. "Hold, big fellas," Ruth murmurs to the oxen, voice low and certain. "One more good step, then another. That's all 1,000 miles ever is." On the far bank, coffee tastes like an accomplishment. The children shake river out of their sleeves and collect sun-warmed stones, because even on a road where grown-ups measure life in miles, children measure it in pockets. Storms walk the plains in high boots. One afternoon the sky goes the color of old brews and the air feels like a secret. Lightning puts its hand on the horizon and doesn't lift it. The herd huddles into itself. Wagon covers snap like sails, about to tear. The captain yells, "Circle up," and the train obeys in a rattling balatung to tail. Spokes touching. Cows and calves pulled inside the rim. People inside that. Fear inside all of it. When the hail comes, it is not pebbles, but fists. Men throw quilts over oxen heads. Women throw their bodies over children. The storm passes the way, storms due to slow and too fast and leaves the ground shredded and shining. They count heads and blessings and the cost in dented lids and bruised shins. That night, the hymn has more gravel in it, and fewer high notes. Platte River country opens like a book someone has thumbed 1,000 times. Tracks splay every direction, last year's, last week's, yesterday's, all leading west because the land itself points that way. Chimney Rock rises out of the plain like a punctuation mark the earth forgot to erase. Buffalo darken the rim of sight until the horizon looks like it grew hair. They learn new work. Buffalo chips become fuel, and the children become proud providers of it. Coffee brewed over chip fire tastes faintly of the prairie's jokes, and nobody complains. The men who insisted on hunting every day quit insisting after they discover how far a bison runs and how much a dead one weighs. Then cholera arrives quiet, quick, and unreasonable. It shows up as a man who was fine at breakfast and gone by noon, as a woman who asks for water and then more until her body is a river with no banks. The Dr. Bastion's soft hands turned hard by the road boy's cloth and says words like miasma and contagion and don't drink from where the oxen stand. People nod, people forget, people die. They bury faster than they weep. Wooden headboards with names written in axle grease lean against the wind. Some families leave stones, some leave prayer, some leave nothing because nothing is what they have left to give. Ruth pins a square of clean muslin inside the bonnet of a girl who won't need bonnets anymore. Tess presses the father's shoulder until the tremor travels into her hand and stops there. Caleb stands with his hat off and holds the shovel. When the man can't, Jonah puts the spade into prairie as gently as if the ground were a child. Fort Laramie is a rumor you can enter. Whitewashed walls, anvils ringing, trade that smells like tallow and possibility. Somewhere a fiddle tries to make a roof out of sound. They mean to rest 3 days. They stay one. A scout rides in dust white and urgent cholera, bad as a wasp nest, talk of a quarantine. The captain lifts a hand and the train moves out like a herd, the herd thunder. Beyond Laramie, the land grows ribs. Bluffs rise. The Platte splits opinions, north, south. The river takes both sides and still doesn't get thinner. The train chooses the route with more grass and fewer graves, and discovers the two are rarely the same. South Pass is not what the map taught. No cliff, no gate, no trumpet. It's a long shrug of the continent where water changes its mind about which ocean it loves. They stand in a wind that can't decide either and look at a sky that has never once been domesticated. At Independence Rock, they write their names. Because everyone does Jonah Walker in a hand that learnt patience from wood grain. Ruth Walker, small but certain. Tess Walker in letters that stretch like she wants to see them from far away. Caleb Walker with an extra loop because he's 15 and not done with loops. Now we're history, Caleb says, and Ruth laughs because history is just something you survive long enough to name. They meet Shoshone traders who know the road like it's in their bones. Fine horses for trade, better advice for free. Don't drink the white water, an old woman says, meaning not the rapids, but the alkaline pools that shine like invitations and drink like lie. And when the wind says rest, 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 it knows the passes better than your captain. Snakes. Fewer than stories say accidents. More. A man loses 2 toes to an axe he sharpened too well. A child falls from a wagon, not under wheels but into prairie soft. Forgiving rises, grass-streaked and smiling as if the land caught her on purpose. Another child doesn't rise. The trail keeps its statistics the way a river keeps pebbles quietly in its pockets. Asterisk. At Fort Hall, the road splits like a question. California south into dust and rumor. Oregon west into basalt and rain. Jonah holds the map as if it will flinch. Ruth watches the people, not the lines. Look at those faces, she said. Burnt thin by desert hope. Women wrapped in a patience that looks like a shawl. Children too quiet for children. That's a hard story, she decides. And they go Oregon by instinct and marriage. The Snake River cuts a black sentence across light, basalt cliffs, sage that smells like a good argument, salmon that turn the water muscular and You can pay, cork, and floative. You can swim. The walkers choose ferries when they can, rope and prayer when they can't. Once the wagon bellies into the current and turns sideways and time slows to the speed of a held breath. Caleb goes as still as the oxen do when they make a decision to either panic or not. They do not. The wagon knows is true. The river lets them pass because the river, too, has appointments. The Blue Mountains live up to the name and down to the grades. Wheels groan, chains speak, men curse politely, women put shoulders where horses should be, and no one makes speeches about it. Up is a ceremony, down is a negotiation. At the bottom of everything, there is always a creek reminding you who made the valley. Then a new kind of choice. The Dalles or the woods, down the Columbia by Raft Wild Water, and those famous rapids that take ore around Mount Hood. On a scratch of road being hacked out of forest with daylight and determination. Last year, a man named Meek led a shortcut into hunger and grief and graves on the high desert. News of that mistake still limps down the trail. This year, rumor says, a toll road is nearly done. Boards over bog, logs over anger, timber over uncertainty. The word Barlow passes mouth to mouth like a tin cup. Road, Ruth says, not because it's easy, but because it's not water. The train votes with axes and coins. They turn their wagons into cathedral shade and learn a new patience, waiting while strangers fell a forest in front of you. One tree at a time, then waiting more while your own people knock branches off the idea of a passage until it fits the shape of a wheel. Rain arrives the way it does in Organaz, a personality. Not knives, not sheets, but a soaking suggestion that you reconsider all your plans and some of your beliefs. The canvas sags, the fire hunkers. Moss invents itself in your boots. People who bragged about eating smoke and dust now discover they are soluble. Keep moving, the road boss shouts. You'll dry in the Willamette. Do we? Tess asks, water running off her hat like a joke. You mold more slowly, he grins. On the last ridge before the valley. Cloud lifts like a theatre trick, and there it is, the Willamette, laid out like a green quilt pressed flat with a warm iron. Fields already grid the bottoms. Cabins smoke. Apple trees someone carried as sticks are now small orchards, thinking. Large thoughts. The river veers slow and sure, as if it has known all along that someday the walkers would arrive. They descend into a smell Ruth has been missing her whole life without, knowing it wet earth with a sweetness baked in. Jonah stops the team and stands with his hat in his hand because sometimes a man should meet a place the way he meets a person he means to love, respectfully, with his head bare, where Caleb asks simply, the question is not about a map. It is about a story, where the ground rises just enough to keep its feet dry. Ruth says, eyes on a knoll stitched with alder and promise, where the creek can talk to the garden without flooding it, where we can see smoke from a neighbor but not count their spoons. They stake an idea and and call it a claim, because you need a word before you can build a wall. The wagon becomes a shed, then a memory of the road. The oxen are turned into pasture and look surprised to discover grass that never seems to end. They set 4 corners. They lay a sill. They raise logs with a crew of people who were strangers this morning and will be godparents in spring. On the 3rd day, a man from the provisional government rides out with paper and a face that has explained a rule to many times today. 640 acres for a married pair, he says. Prove it. Improve it. Define improve, Ruth says, as if she might argue the definition into the shape of a garden. Fence, plow, house, road, he recites. Presence, he adds. Lower, stay. Staying is the hard part, Jonah says, thinking of graves along the Platte. Names on granite, rafts that didn't make the far eddy. They stay. Winter is rain and a fire that never quits but never quite wins. Spring opens like a hand wheat, climbs the hill by inches you can't see. Potatoes fatten in a dark they were built for. Neighbors bring seed and stories. The walkers trade labor and learn Oregon weather the way they learned river moods, by listening. They help a widow raise a cabin that shouldn't stand, and then does, because the young men who built it will watch it like a dog. At dusk, the valley. Homes are quiet, made of birds in distance, and the kind of work you can feel in your back in a good way. Jonah sits on a hewn sill and writes to Elias's memory about the earthquake that taught him humility and the river that taught him rope. Ruth sets the first jar of salmon on a shelf that will hold a winter. Tess walks the fence line as if it's a sentence she plans to rewrite until it reads right. Caleb oils a harness and looks past the tree line with the posture of someone already measuring what comes next. Word travels slow and crooked, but it travels. In 46, between planting and haying, a trader brings news folded in his hatband. War. With Mexico, a boundary dispute sketched in smoke and saber. Towns with Spanish names becoming American on paper faster than they change in real life. The map is moving again. Ruth tucks the news under a plate to keep it from blowing away. We just finished walking off one map, she says. Now the country is redrawing another. And we, Jonah says, looking at the valley, are going to learn what it means to stay put when the borders won't. That night rain tickles the roof and the creek speaks an Oregon language they are starting to understand. The fire breathes even and low. In the corner, the Dutch oven cools, black, faithful. A circle that has carried them from Missouri into a life made of the same basic ingredients. Flour, salt, heat, stubbornness. Outside, the dark smells like cedar and patience. Inside, Tess unrolls a new map, blank paper, edges sharp. She looks at Caleb and grins. Your turn, she says, handing him the pencil. Borders move 1846 to 1848. Cannon smoke over Chaparral. Vaqueros rope history while treaties change names faster than towns can paint new signs. In the Southwest, land trades flags. In Oregon, the walkers learn what a distant war means to a new farm at the edge of rain. Asterisk, the border moves first on paper, then on people in the chaparral north of the Pueblo de Los Angeles. A rawhide riata sings against a steer's horns and Ana Maria Carrillo leans back in her saddle until the world narrows to horse, rope, and dust. The steer fights the loop hooves, gouging the hard pan. But Anna's mare, Mora, sits on her haunches and drags the animal into a circle as neat as a stitched hem. The boys whoop, Anna doesn't. Work is work. When the steer finally tires, she eases. The tension slips the loop free, and lifts her hat to let heat swim away. Brava calls her uncle, Don Esteban, from the shade of a live oak. He is a ranchero by inheritance and habit, his face carved by sun and cattle prices. Your abuelo would say, "Your hand is truer than your father's." Ana smiles because that is praise and warning. On this land a Spanish grant, confirmed under the Mexican Republic skill, keeps beef on the hoof and family names on deeds. But a good hand with rope can't tie down a rumor blowing north. Ships at Monterey, soldiers at the Presidio, a new flag folded like an argument in someone's saddlebags. News, she asks, coiling her riata into a rawhide hondilla. Don Esteban glances toward the long, low house where the kitchen ceiling is black with smoke and the cool room smells like oranges and old wine. A rider came at sunup. Americans up in Sonoma shouting about a bear. Navy ships in the bay. They say a captain took Monterey without firing. A bear. Ana laughs despite the shadows in the news. Men and their flags. Men and their papers, he corrects. Keep your rope oiled. We may be roping more than cattle. That afternoon the vaqueros gather in the patio, spurs singing, saddles creaking, hats tilted against sun and worry. Dona Jezebel, the true head of the house. Despite the titles, men prefer pours coffee and issues orders as if preparing for a drought. Move horses to the back pastures, count hides. Lock the tallow, no alone riding. We are California's weather. The next wind blows, Spanish, Mexican, or American. We keep the rancho whole. Out in the hills, the work doesn't pause because rumors are louder. Ana and the boys cut out strays, brand this year's calves, mend a section of fence the last winter's storms tore down to kindling. In the evening, the old songs reach the porch, and for an hour everyone pretends the world hasn't tilted. After dark, coyotes yip and a far drum of hooves on hard ground says someone is riding fast with news or fear. 2 mornings later, the news comes in blue wool. A squad of us dragoons rides into the yard, led by a young lieutenant whose face tries to be older than it is. Behind them, a rider in rougher clothes, hat battered, eyes restless, an American settler from the north. Ana guesses, one of the men who carved names into trees above Sonoma and called it Destiny, Señor Carrillo. The lieutenant says, removing his hat. He pronounces the name as if it were a fence post. By order of Commodore Sloat and the United States of America, this territory is under American protection. We require feed and beef for the troops. Vouchers will be provided. Compensation will follow when Congress, Dona Jezebel, steps forward. In this yard, titles don't travel, but authority does. You will be fed, she says, because Californios are generous until generosity becomes surrender, and you will sign for what you take. Names, quantities. The names are important. The lieutenant flushes a boy's flush and nods. The settler smirks as if names are elastic, as if paper can be persuaded to forget. Ana watches him the way she watches a cornered steer, never from directly in front. By dusk, the soldiers are gone, leaving the yard dusty and lighter by 5 beeves, 2 sacks of barley, and several coils of good rope. The voucher bears a neat hand and 2 signatures, one pressed hard enough to cut the paper. In a drawer with baptismal records and love letters, it looks like a threat dressed as a promise. Will they come back? Asks Felipe, a vaquero whose temper runs ahead of his spurs. Of course, Dona Jezebel says. Armies are like drought. They don't end because you want them to. On the Columbia 2,000 miles north, Rain taps the Walker roof and the Willamette listens for spring. Jonah stacks split fur under the eaves, turns his face to the wet, and thinks of the letter the trader left this morning. War with Mexico, he'd said cheerfully, as if bringing sugar. Oregon's line with Britain is settled at last along the 49th parallel, not at the shout of 54-40. Flags and maps arguing again, as if the continent were a quilt and men could decide where the seams ought to lie by squinting dot. Ruth sets a hand to his shoulder, warm through wool. Prices will rise, she says. Lumber, flour, hides. Wars always eat cupboards far from where the cannons eat men. We'll sell a little, not a lot, Jonah says. I don't want money that tastes like iron. He thinks of the girl they buried along the Platte, of the Sauk families, squeezed off their river, as if grief were an instruction. He thinks of the Shawnee man stone by water tapping his chest and pointing west. Borders slice lives in places. Cartographers never have to walk at meeting that Sunday. Someone whispers recruitment volunteers heading south from the Missouri. A second front promised on maps, if not in wagons. Caleb, who has acquired an extra inch and a dangerous calm, watches the men who talk loudest. Ruth watches Caleb. Steady, she tells him later, over stew. The world is always auditioning you for someone else's play. Caleb grins. I have fence to mend anyway. He points his spoon toward the creek. And a salmon that owes me satisfaction. Life continues on the edge of new borders. Wheat heads, potatoes, mound. Rain argues with sunshine the way married people do when love hides under chores. The Walkers trade boards for seed with a British farmer who stayed when the line moved past. His barn, still here, he says, tapping his boots. A map's problem, not mine. They share coffee that tastes like treaty and get on with their work. In California, the war wears a dozen outfits. In Sonoma, American settlers rope a flag, with a bear painted like a pig, and call themselves a republic until the Navy folds them into something bigger. In Los Angeles, Californios gather under command of men with 2 languages and 1 land, ride into the city with lances bright, and push blue uniforms back toward the sea. In the south, vaqueros who know every arroyo like a brother's laugh, dance around dragoons who read maps instead of hills. In the north, a U.S. captain with a talent for self-promotion rides everywhere at once, planting names that will later bloom into careers. Anna's cousin, Ignacio, joins a Lancers company, his mother crying under a shawl that can't hide pride. For the rancho, he says, kissing her brow. For the old papers. He rides away as if sound were a thing you could leave behind. Anna rides patrol around their own fences the practical war. She watches for soldiers who will sign vouchers, and for settlers who will not, for vaqueros from other ranchos who might be friendly or might be hungry, for the kinds of men who show up in every war looking to turn chaos into land. Twice she finds cut wire where there should be a knot. Once she finds a brand burned fresh over her family's mark. She brings the calf home anyway and tells Dona Jezebel, who burns the correct brand back over the lie. Paper and iron, both. Winter comes without asking. Rains soften the hard land, turn arroyos into traps, swell the rivers so that the willows remember who they used to be. Soldiers on both sides curse in languages the trees don't care to learn. Somewhere near San Gabriel, a battle squats under a cloud and leaves men on the ground who didn't know that morning would be their last ordinary sunrise. By spring, the news unknots. Mexico's capital has fallen. A treaty is being written on the far side of deserts. California, New Mexico, and pieces with names older than nations will be painted a different color in atlases, printed by boys who have never seen a saguaro. Treaty. The word travels slower than hunger, but faster than justice. It arrives at the rancho as a priest's nod and a folded paper in a lawyer's hand. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. California is American now. Mexican citizens may choose to remain and become citizens. Land grants will be honored, if valid, says the lawyer. A phrase with 1,000 little knives in it. What is valid? Dona Jezebel asks. She lays their documents on the table's Spanish scripts with flourishes, Mexican confirmations, with seals, a voucher signed in neat U.S. Army letters for 5 beeves and 2 sacks of barley. The lawyer smiles a small smile and spreads his hands, revealing his cufflinks. A land commission will be established. You will prove your claim, in English, with surveys, witnesses, patience. We have all 3, she says. More than most. Good, he says, already thinking of the bills he can write for. Work he will define, because some of your neighbors will have none. The commission arrives as promised, a new court in a new town with new rules. Old men with perfect memories listen to young men with perfect pens. Surveyors in boots to clean for trust drag chains across hills that never learned their straight lines. Claims are amended, contested, clarified, words that often mean diminished. Some ranchos survive the paperwork intact. Some shrink and fray, some fall into the pockets of men who read better than they rode. Asterisk Anatistephius. Hat in hand, dress clean, eyes steady. She names the creeks by their old names and the stones by no names at all, points with a finger that has handled rope since before war and will after peace. She watches a clerk flatten a wrinkle in the title paper and thinks how easily a hand can smooth a mountain into a line. When she leaves the courtroom, soldiers are drilling on a square that used to be called something else. Children chalk hopscotch squares in both languages. A peddler sells knives and notions and news. They found gold, he says lightly, as if testing a joke. Up near the American River, a carpenter and a captain. Tiny yellow stones, like the sun forgot them. Men always find gold, someone replies, mostly in stories. Maybe, the peddler shrugs. But I saw a flake the size of a lentil and a man's eyes the size of plates. Anna buys needles and pretends not to notice. How her own heart lifts at the thought of something that might fix what the war has loosened. Across the square, 3 sailors talk in excited undertones. One holds a scrap of paper with a rough map, X's where a river meets a sawmill's tail race. Hope moves through the crowd like a spark in dry grass. So does greed, so does trouble. Asterisk in the Willamette, trouble and hope arrive on the same pack horse. A trader stomps mud from his boots on the Walker porch and warms his hands over Ruth's stove. Gold in California, he says, as if announcing a birth. Real stuff, yellow as marigolds. Men quitting ships in the bay, running for the hills. They call it a rush already, and it ain't even harvest. Caleb's spoon stops halfway to his mouth. Tess, who keeps a ledger of every trade and bushel, feels numbers rearrange themselves in her head. Jonah doesn't move, which is how he measures temptations, by not moving first. Wheat's worth more when miners need bread, Ruth says finally, not unkindly. Boards for sluice boxes, tallow for candles, cloth for tents. The road will be busy both directions. Or, the trader says, eyes sliding to Caleb, you go and take it out of the river yourself. Come back with your pockets full and your stories fuller. Caleb doesn't breathe for a count of 5. He sees what the trader wants him to see. A quick fortune, a wagon with store-bought windows, a future coming faster. He also sees his mother's hands, the way they know when a biscuit is done, by listening, and his father's back bent over a furrow that will feed them when stories don't. Plow first, he says, surprising himself. Then we'll see. Stubborn. The trader laughs. Must be an Oregon thing. Frontier thing, Ruth corrects, pouring him more coffee. Gold or no gold. That night, Caleb lies awake and hears the creak and, beneath it, the far hum of a world shifting its weight. South, flags changed and stayed. Paper was laid on top of paper until land looked like a ledger. Now the earth itself is about to offer bright bait to every restless heart. He knows some hearts don't come back when they go chasing dot in the dark. Tess rolls the map she keeps under her mattress, blank paper, crisp. At the top she writes in a neat hand, the California road. Then she sets the pencil down and lets the line wait. In California, the first pans lift from the American river like shy birds. In the riffles, sunshine seems to refuse to leave when the water does. A carpenter's hand closes on a flake and the world, already tilted, tips again. Anna hears about it. First from a muleteer who swears he saw nuggets pried from blue clay with a pocket knife. Quiet, he urges, eyes glinting as if quiet has ever been a permanent condition. Tell only family. Go before the Navy hears, before the newspapers, before the world. Before the lawyers, Donor Jezebel mutters. And everyone laughs, because that is the joke the century keeps telling. Anna stands in the yard under the same live oak, riata on her hip, Mora dancing at the edge of her patience. She looks north. She can almost feel the country fill with footfalls, the sound of thousands of choices leaving home. She touches the riata, feels Rawhide's old lesson. A rope is only as honest as the hand that throws it. Shall we go? Philippe asks, breathless, in a way she hasn't heard in him since they were children chasing jackrabbits. We are rancheros, she says, but her mouth can't keep the rest of her from wanting. And maybe we are miners for a season. At the rancho table that night, they count coin and courage, decide who can leave and who must stay, how many hands the cattle require, and how many hopes the river can carry. The border moved, and they stayed put. Now the ground itself is moving under people, who haven't yet learned what staying costs and what leaving buys. On the Willamette, a boy with Oregon mud on his boots sharpens a shovel he swears is for ditch work. In Los Angeles, a vaquera oils her saddle for a ride not mapped on any paper she trusts. Between them lies the long road south, and beyond it, the sound of water scratching gold out of rock like a match against grit. Asterisk gold fever, 1849 to 1853. A valley erupts. A miner chases luck while a cook, a shopkeeper, a black teamster, and a Chinese carpenter quietly turns sweat into certainty. Rivers glitter, towns explode, and the Walker Californios learn the difference between striking it rich and getting rich. Asterisk gold isn't a color. It's an argument that talks men out of sleep. By March, the rumor is loud enough to hear over Oregon rain. By April, Caleb Walker is sharpening a shovel he swears is for ditching. By May, he stops, pretending. I'll go for one season, he tells Ruth, who is measuring coffee into a sack like it's time itself. I'll be back before the new wheat heads. Bring your hands back whole, Ruth says. Bring your word back unbent. She ties the coffee with a sailor's knot and tucks in a needle and heavy thread. Fortunes tear. Jonah stands quiet in the doorway and lets the boy see both pride and worry. If a river tries to sell you something, ask it what it's buying, he says, and count partners before you count ounces. Tess presses a small ledger into Caleb's palm. Write prices. Don't trust memories. Send letters north with any trader who looks like he can keep a promise. Caleb laughs, because if he doesn't, the road will be heavier than the shovel. I'll write so much, you'll wish I hadn't learned. He goes south on a track stitched together from animal paths, wagon scars, and people's ideas of shortcuts. In the Umpqua, he falls in with a freight outfit headed the same way. 6 yoke of oxen, a string of mules, 3 canvas-topped wagons, and a teamster everyone calls Isaiah Tall, black shoulders, like a barn door, voice low enough to settle skittish. Stock and men. Isaiah Green, the man says, offering a hand like a workbench. I haul what pays to move. Flour, tools, hope. Hope's heavy, but it pays in cash. Caleb rides a day, then another, and learns Isaiah's road rules. Start before light, stop before argument. Never walk past a thirsty animal. Keep an eye on the quiet man, not the loud one. At the Sacramento, the traffic thickens until the trail looks like a river that lost its water and kept its current wagons. Handcarts, men on foot with frying pans clanking like church bells on their packs. San Francisco is a boomtown written in pencil. Canvas ghosts flap where streets will be. Ships rot at anchor, crews gone inland with pans and fever. A plank shack calls itself a bank because it has a table and a man with a waistcoat. The prices are a joke that stops being funny. Eggs $1. Each, shovels 3, boots 10, a bed in a tent if you don't ask questions. People pay anyway, grinning like men who've misplaced their hard cents and are hoping to find it in a pan. They push for the Sierra because that's where the rumor says the ground argues back. The American River is crowded with men bent like question marks, rocking tin pans, talking to the riffles as if the water owes them an apology. Caleb buys a permit, a pan, and the right to fail in a new place. He finds a gravel bar with more story than shine and works until his hands look 50. Day 1, black sand and flickers. Enough to make a man honest about tomorrow. Day 2, less. Day 3, more. Day 4, nothing. The river keeps a straight face and refuses to explain itself. Ground sluice, says a voice behind him. Move more dirt. Let the water do the work. Pans are for tourists. The speaker is a carpenter with sawdust still clinging to his cuffs. His name is Lee Wei. He rolled into camp with a toolbox and a laugh that didn't ask permission. Back in Guangdong, he framed houses. Here he frames water. He shows Caleb a drawing in charcoal, a trough with riffles and a gate you can open with. A kick. Build 4 together, he says. Share the work. Share the gold. Share the watching. Men respect a crowd more than a law. They shake on it because there isn't time not to. Isaiah joins in. He can drop a load at the bar, work 3 hours, then catch the outfit on their way back down. A woman in a red kerchief who calls herself Mrs. Flynn sets up a canvas store 20 yards off and becomes their quartermaster whether they like it or not. You'll need nails and lamp oil by Friday, she tells them, before they've noticed the nails are short and the lamp is low. Pay me in dust if cash runs tight, but don't insult me with promises. Promise is the cheapest thing in the diggings. Upstream, a California remuda sweeps through camp like a polished idea. Horses slick as river stones. Riders with the quiet seat of people who were raised in saddles. One of them had low reatta coiled swings down to swap a steer. For flour, it's Anna Maria Carrillo, looking like 10 decisions carried to term. Beef tomorrow. She says to Mrs. Flynn, flipping a silver dollar in the air and catching it with a snatch of authority. For reals a pound. Less if you bring me a decent knife. You'll get a fair knife, Mrs. Flynn says, and the two women smile. The way skilled people smile when they recognize their own. The sluices go together in a day because want is a good carpenter. Leeway's hands move like instructions. Isaiah's back is a machine that never needs fixing. Caleb learns to read water by the inches it refuses to give him. The angle where a stick hovers. The shimmer where fine gold rides high. The dark tongue where it drops by week's end. The riffles hold a promise you can pick up with your fingers. They burn mercury because that's what everyone does now. Quicksilver trick that makes gold gather like gossip. It's a wicked bargain, and they know it. Metal in the blood for metal in the poker butt. A man can only choose from the choices he can see, and this year, the mountains are handing out a kind of blindness. Isaiah doesn't trust luck, so he tracks numbers. We keep half the take in a strongbox under Mrs. Flynn's floor. He says, split the other half weekly. Wages for backs, dividends for brains. He carries a little scale and a book with a pencil nub tied by a string. Men make fun until they need to borrow $1. Then they start carrying pencils, too. Work builds a kind of church. The rhythm of shovel and wash and tap and dump. The cussing when a stone pretends it's there to help and isn't. The cheer when some kid from Vermont yelps and holds up a flake like the moon loaned him a thumbnail. Camp builds a kind of town. A cook fire line becomes a street. A barrel becomes a courthouse when a claim dispute needs a judge. That judge is a miner with a voice that can cross a creek and a memory that can carry a list. Miners meeting, he shouts. 1 claim per man. Respect posted stakes. Witnesses speak before. Hurrahs. The court is fast. The punishment's fast. To fines, forfeiture. Sometimes a ride out of camp a little too fast for dignity. Not everyone is invited to the same justice. The legislature down in the city invents a foreign miners' tax. It's aimed like a rifle and fired like a cannon. Mexican miners, Chileans, Chinese crews, anyone with an accent the tax collector doesn't like pay to stay when the dirt is free. Leeway's crew watches a deputy nail a notice to a pine and doesn't argue. They gather dust for the man because they can't afford to gather bruises. The next day they move a mile upstream in the night. The river doesn't check papers. Men will. Law is a tool, Isaiah says. Lo, as he and Caleb shoulder timber for a new sluice. Question is always who holds the handle. The big money often walks past the pans. Mrs. Flynn's canvas store becomes a board shack with a plank floor and a glass jar of peppermint sticks that makes men cry for home. She buys beans and flour in San Francisco when the price dips, sells them uphill. When the price learns to climb, she nails a hand-painted sign over her door. Cash or dust, fair weights. Men take off their hats when they enter, because it's the only place around that. Feels like rules are stronger than shouting dot down on the road. Anna and 2 cousins drive. Cattle north and coins south. Beef is a bank on 4 legs. Her riata writes $signs in the air. Her knife turns, steers into money and marrow. The family's rancho survives the land commission because Dona Jezebel knows which lawyer to feed and which to starve. But the paper they finally win describes a smaller world than they rode before the war. The profit from beef buys back some of what the court stole with adjectives. Are you rich? Philippe asks, as they camp by a creek that might be called the same thing in two languages and mean different. Memories in each. Rich enough to pay. A lawyer, when he writes a bill, Anna says, not rich enough to stop watching my brand. The winter of 49 sluices, camps bare. The winter of 50 flashes its knife. Snow loads the pines until they complain like old ships. Men freeze within a stone's throw of a fire because whiskey is a liar. Fever comes as if summoned by crowds and filth. Isaiah keeps his crew alive by rationing hope and boiling everything that touches a mouth. Leeway teaches a cough tea that tastes like dirt and saves more than one man from becoming a cairn beside the trail. Spring explodes and soda machines. A company aprever brings in iron pipe and a notion hydraulic nozzles that turn hills into slurry, flumes that sketch the sky, dams that bully creeks into long, obedient lines. Wherefore men did in a week what a river allowed, 40 men now. Do in a day what a mountain can't stop. The ground moves, not up, not down, but away. Future, says a superintendent with a hat too stiff for honesty. And the word echoes off hills that were not asked. For the small crews, the map changes. Again. Caleb watches their riffles yield thinner and thinner stories. Isaiah watches prices go places only mules can follow. Leeway watches a hillside he loved for its geometry fall into a gully he never respected. They pivot because that's what people on a frontier do when the frontier turns. Freight, Isaiah says. Boards up, gold down. Money both ways. He buys another wagon with dust and a handshake. Hires 2 hands who know how to keep a wheel from thinking it's a square. And leans into the grade like a man who plans to retire his back before it retires him. Sluices for hire, Leeway adds. He and 3 cousins build on contract now. Box, gate, riffle, water box, fast, square, no splinters, no lies. They work for any crew that pays cash and doesn't spit at their boots. He learns enough words to say, 2 days. Good work, and that creek will move in storm. Don't build there. No, don't. When a deputy rides through with a badge. And a bill, Leeway smiles like a man who has already moved the shop. Caleb counts his dust and his days. He has maybe a month's wages in a pouch with a drawstring Tess taught him to tie. He has calluses he brought with him and a few new ones. He didn't ask for. He has learned that luck is a wave and work is a tide. He has learned, too, that a letter home weighs less than guilt. He writes on Mrs. Flynn's counter, left elbow in a sugar spill. Ma, alive, whole, partners honest. Don't worry if you can't help it. Big claims eat hills now. We're hauling, building, keeping our eyes. Isaiah says money in motion is still money. Tell Pa the shovel did more good on the handle end than the blade. Tell Tess flour is 40 a barrel today, 30 yesterday, maybe 60 tomorrow. Tell the creek I miss its voice. See Mrs. Flynn sanddusts the ink and folds the paper like it's a loaf. I'll send this down with the next team, she says. I'm running an express now, didn't you hear? Of course you are. Caleb grins. By autumn of 51, he makes his decision the only way a man on the road can by walking it. He sells his share in the freighting outfit back to Isaiah with terms that make both men feel square. He presses 2 months' wages into Leeway's hand. If you come north, look us up, he says, drawing a map with a finger on the Counter Valley Creek, a pine that forks like a wino tax collector's. Only rain. Leeway laughs, a low, warm sound. Rain I can build under, he says. Men. Not always. Caleb swings north with a small train of men who look several kinds of older than when they came south, some empty-handed and lighter for it. Some with poke sacks heavy enough to pull a shoulder down, all with stories that won't sit still. On a ridge above the Sacramento he turns and sees the Sierra raw and picked at, flumes scarring the air, tents like white mushrooms after a flood. Down in the bay, a city he barely recognizes is building itself 3 times over with lumber that smells like Oregon. Ships crowd each other at anchor, masts like a black forest. Money changes hands so fast the coins hardly warm. He reaches the Willamette as the maple leaves let go. The valley smells like wet soil and raisins. Ruth meets him in the yard with a hand to his cheek and a look that takes inventory's fingers. The line of a back that did not break for a pocket of metal. Jonah takes the shovel from his son like a baton and sets it by the door. Tess weighs the poke on her palm, nods once, writes a number in her book, and then erases it and writes a different one because some credits aren't meant to be counted the first day. Did you strike it rich? A neighbor asks at meeting, because he can't not. Caleb shakes his head and smiles like a man who learned his answer is better than the question. I got paid, he says. So did a lot of people who never touched a pan. He plants in spring with a sharp eye and a back that knows what it's worth. When traders come north, stuffed with gold, dust and short on flour, he sells fair and cash on the barrel. When a letter arrives with Leeway's careful characters, Ruth reads it aloud twice. Building sluices might come north to build mills. If there is lumber and good water. We hear Oregon is rain and trees. Trees sound like work. Down in California, Anna stands on the veranda as dawn lifts. The rancho's grant is smaller on paper and the same in her heart. A new fence line shines where an old memory used to be. Cattle prices rise and fall like boats in a tide of men. She keeps the brand hot and the vouchers signed. When a cousin speaks of selling and moving to town, she says, "We will not live behind another man's counter. This land remembers our names out loud." By 53, the easy diggings are mostly stories. The river has trained a generation to hear opportunity in running water. Some stay, buying into machines or marrying towns. Some leave, pockets thin, the lesson thick. Miners make gold. Merchants make wealth. Teamsters, rancheros, cooks, carpenters, anyone who understood that the rush was really a market got paid twice. On a clear night in Oregon, Caleb sits on the sill of the new barn and counts quiet victories. A roof that doesn't weep. A granary with room to brag. A family that still sits at one table. Far to the east, the prairie waits under a sky big enough to dare anyone with breath to try it. Newspapers talk of Kansas and Nebraska, of surveys and stakes, of free soil and free men. And in some rooms in Washington, a bill with a simple hook is sharpening its teeth. Live on land, improve it, and it becomes yours. The country is getting ready to give away what it took so much to take. Asterisk free land. High cost 1862 to 1867. The Homestead Act throws open the plains. 160 acres for the price of 5 winter-sift grasshoppers. Blizzards, debt, and loneliness don't collect first. Black homesteaders, immigrant farmers, and Civil War widows shoulder into the wind while the walkers decide whether more land is worth more miles. Asterisk. The sign over the land office door is a promise and a dare. Homesteads, 160 acres, live on it, work IT. It's yours, inside. The air smells like paper and dust, like somebody's future folded into an envelope. A line snakes past a desk where a clerk with a battlefield scar in his beard repeats the sermon he said since June. 5 years. Residence. Cultivation. Proof by 2 witnesses. Fee is $14 now, $6 when you patent. Head of household, or 21 unless you're a widow. He raises his voice a hair for that last part, because 2 women in black stand in line without looking at each other. The war has built a new kind of pioneer. Eliza Pike steps forward when it's her turn, and the clerk doesn't flinch at the way she fits the category too well. 28. A neat hand that writes Eliza Ann Pike, late of Iowa, widow of James Pike, deceased. At Shiloh, 2 children in tow who stand straight because their father won't ever again. She chooses a quarter section north of the Republican River because the map says water and the clerk says, nobody claimed it last week, and the horizon says everything else. Witnesses, the clerk asks mechanically. I'll bring them, Eliza says, and means to make some. Out in the Kansas heat. The world is too large for the wagon she's bought and the courage she's borrowing. Still, wheels turn. The team leans into the yoke. The children Kit at 11, Mary at 7, watch the way the grass leans in the wind and learn what emptiness sounds like. The prairie inhales, and they move with it. Far west, Oregon rain lays its hand on Walker shingles in the spring of 1862, and the valley breathes wheat. Ruth warms her fingers over the stove and reads Lincoln's signature aloud from a paper that came north with coffee and a new spelling of future. Homestead, Caleb repeats, tasting the word like hard candy. He's back from California with a longer stride and pockets that no longer jingle, because he's invested them in fence and roof and a saw blade that sings all day. 2 quarters for married folks, land just for living on it. Jonah grunts. You always paid for good land, he says, either in money or in bone. This one collects bone with receipts. Tesla jar open, pencil ready does math, a different way if we stay, she says. We make this farm a fact. If you go, we split our backs. The world's offering us more horizon than we have lives. They stay, as people who've found a valley often do. They plant an orchard because fruit is a vote for the future, and help leeway set a mill over a creek because sawdust is money. With a smell. The war is far, but it sends smoke. Prices judder, letters carry news with black borders, and a recruiter's drum reaches even Oregon through echoes. Caleb runs a thumb down the map to Kansas and shakes his head. Later, he tells the itch. Maybe later. In Leavenworth, a freighting outfit adjusts to a new market. The lead teamster is Isaiah Green, last seen hauling hope and flour through California. Now wearing a blue shell jacket as a windbreaker and a new calm like iron. He didn't enlist. Exactly, he signed on to drive for the Union Army, which is what he was born to do. Move heavy things where they're needed while men who make speeches pretend to be in charge. He learns the war from a teamster's vantage mud that will swallow an army and spit out its buttons. Wagons too close together when the shells come. Officers who don't know which way a river runs until somebody points. He sees the country bleed and then resolves to live long enough to see it scab. When the fighting eases and the roads go quiet, Isaiah doesn't want to go back to hauling other men's plans. He stands in a doorway with the same sign Eliza read, and the clerk gives him the same speech with a different look. A black man claiming free land in Kansas is both new and do you served. The clerk asks, almost kindly. Drove, Isaiah says, long enough to hate wheels, long enough to trust them. He signs his name slow, letter by letter, the way a man builds a house. On the smoky hill, south of a brand new line of iron being laid west steel, teeth-chewing prairie, he pounds a stake and says, here, to no one in particular, and to everyone who thought he couldn't. His sister Lila arrives with a boy who will sprout like corn and a bundle that holds everything delicate left in their family. We'll call it sleep when we start sleeping, she says. And Isaiah laughs because the only other choice is to sit down and never get back up. Eliza's first house is a hole and a hope. A dugout on the south face of a swale, roofed with cottonwood poles hauled 10 miles, thatched with grass that looks like hair. The walls are earth and the floor is earth and the air smells like earth, cool and mushrooms sweet when it's polite, dank and mousy when it forgets. Kit learns to lay a fire that smokes up and out without sulking inside. Mary learns to put her boots upside down so the morning doesn't startle her with a spider. Neighbors arrive, the way rain does suddenly and from nowhere. Jana and Jayan Novak, Moravians, their wagon patched with sheet iron and faith. They can make bread from nothing and songs from anything. A war widow from Ohio whose hands are cracked like old maps and who can pull a calf without breaking a promise to herself. A Cheyenne man on a painted pony who sits arise and watches and does not wave. He is the first lesson Eliza's children get in the word before. When the first plow bites sod, the prairie acts like it's never met the idea. The blade skitters, the team strains, and the grass roots knit deep as Knuckles laughs a little. It takes 3 passes, broken teeth, 1 neighbor, and a curse borrowed from Moravia, to peel a furrow the way you peel a long potato. The smell that rises could make a city man weep, wet and green and old as everything. You'll need a garden this year, the Ohio widow says, practical as sunrise. Potatoes, beans, something that likes to try. She shows Eliza how to plant in a circle to catch a jealous wind, how to tuck a seed like a secret, how to talk to onions without lying. They lay a fence with sticks that do not want to be a fence and rope that is already tired. The rabbits laugh politely and hop through. Asterisk, in August, the sky goes the wrong color green, like bruised glass. A column of cloud bites the earth and comes toward them on a leg of wind. They don't call it a tornado yet. They call it that thing. Eliza bundles the children into the dugout, arms around them, back to the door, breathing hard because that's what guts do when weather remembers how big it is. The world rips. The roof holds. The stove wanders a foot and sulks. After, the grass lies flat like a field of hounds, and the horizon looks surprised to still be there. In November, an early white arrives, cat-footed and pretty, then remembers its job. Snow piles until the dugout is a burrow, and the children learn the prayer. You say before you step outside, let the door open. The hard winter of 66, 67 sits on the plains like an unwelcome uncle. Cattle die, standing just lean, sleep, and don't stand up. Men get lost between house and barn in 40 yards, and their names freeze upright in their throats. Eliza stretches flour with grit and grace and teaches her children the difference between hunger and fear. One morning the wind stops like a choked singer. The quiet is a kind of violence. Then the drifts slump. Water argues with eaves. The dugouts. Earthen lip makes a muddy grin. Eliza and the children stand outside and let their coats steam in a sun that pretends it never left. They hang everything that can hang and laugh at nothing until something inside them loosens. A line of soldiers passes Eliza's claim in 64 on their way west. Bluecoats, dusty, faces set. News rides their dust. An attack in Creek, people, say women and children dead under a flag. Later, other news. A captain's boasts, a minister's tears, a congressional reprimand that tastes like ash. The plains are a house with 2 front doors. Settlers entering from the east. Soldiers exiting from the west to meet men and women who didn't invite either. The war in the south ends. The wars here learn new names. Asterisk on the Bozeman Trail, far. To the north, Red Cloud refuses a road everyone else calls inevitable. In 66, 80 men follow their officer into a white cold and don't come back. The rumor travels south through Snow and Barham and Sermon. Fetterman, wiped out. Around smoky stoves, voices lower. This is not the old frontier, someone says. This is the old one remembering itself. Isaiah learns to see patrols before he hears them. Not because he is in danger, he isn't. He's a homesteader with paper butt, because trouble travels with armies the way lice travel with blankets. He keeps a coffee pot on the coals and hands. A cup to any soldier who rides up with a face that looks like it missed Sunday. He trades fence posts for news. When a corporal jokes about buffalo infinite as sin. Isaiah looks past him at a prairie now interrupted by bleached skulls and says nothing. The herds are still vast in 67, but they've discovered markets and rifles, and the end of a thing begins before most people notice. Asterisk. Lila joins a sewing circle that looks like one thing and is 3. Quilts for warmth, talk for sanity, plans for Sunday. A white widow, a German girl with a laugh like bells, a woman with a baby whose father wore graith. They stitch their differences into patterns that look better from a distance. On a clear day, a survey crew lays out a town site 12 miles east, just a grid and a dream at first. Then a saloon, a blacksmith, a mercantile where a boy with an East Coast haircut sells kerosene. And arguments about politics. Railroad will reach here by fall, he says monthly, as if repetition can move track. When it does reach late, summer 67, engine hissing like a smug dragon, the town does in a week what it would have needed a year for. The depot smells like creosote and bluff. The stock pens draw Texas cattle up the Chisholm Trail beeves that remember the smell of Mexico and hooves that haven't stopped since the last water. Cowboys with hats like roofs loop the rails and laugh too loud because they're 20 and survived a trail diagnosed as impossible by men who never saddled up. Eliza watches it drive past like weather dust, like fog, bawling like a choir that can't hear itself. A man named McCoy buys a lot and calls his pens the best in Kansas because he is the first person to say it, and that is sometimes all it takes. Prices rise, fights rise. The town grows a sheriff and a hangman and never feeds either enough. Saturday is louder now. Sunday sings louder to dot out on Eliza's quarter. The second spring is a little less cruel because she learned the first one. She plants a windbreak with willow cuttings along the draw. They take root like gossip. She lays prairie hay into a thatch that doesn't leak unless the wind wants it to. Jana Novak shows her how to make a sody that doesn't rain mud because the roof's arch matters and so does pride. They raise it in a day with neighbors, the way strangers turn into pronouns. We need another beam. We can lift on 3. Her witnesses sign the proof the following year. The clerk looks at the paper, sideways, as if truth might show better from another angle. 5 years not up, he says. I'm filing my intention to prove. Eliza replies in a polite that has flint in it. You can read the law to me again if you want the practice. He grins despite himself and stamps where stamps make shadow. You'll make it, he says, surprising both of them. A small plague of insects comes in late summer, the kind the old-timers shrug off and the new folks think are biblical. Not the thick black clouds of law, but enough to teach humility. They chew one corner of the corn and hum like something holy, then lift at a change of wind as if on a signal only they can hear. Kit invents a prayer that is mostly a threat, and Mary laughs until she doesn't. On Isaiah's place, a sod barn rises like a respectable hill. He hammers boards over a door that will never hang quite straight and steps back with a kind of astonishment. Leela plants sunflowers along the south wall because beauty feeds something no government can measure. When the first letter arrives, addressed to Mr. Isaiah Green, Smoky Hill, P.O., he holds it a long time before breaking the seal. It's from a man he holed with down near Vicksburg. Heard you took a claim, the ground yours, your name on paper. Isaiah writes back, the ground mine because I am on it. Paper is a way to tell strangers. You should come talk to it yourself. It listens. All the while, the iron road cuts west behind schedule and ahead of its own fear. Telegraph poles rise like a new kind of tree. Stage stations blink out and reappear elsewhere. Soldiers' forts throw square shadows on grass that keeps growing because nobody told it not to. Treaties stack on treaties, paper layered over promises, layered over lies. And the wind keeps the only honest minutes anyone can read. News travels, faster than horses now. In Oregon, Jonah reads about Appomattox a week slow and about Lincoln's murder with a shock that won't soften. Ruth folds the paper like a burial and then opens it again because grief wants company. Caleb watches a boy from Corvallis head east to the war, too late to fight, and come back wearing a medal as if time owed him a story anyway. Leeway's mill sends planks south. Letters come north with money and requests mill wheels, sluice gates, bridge timbers, and the creek chatters approval at being the kind of water that builds Anna. Carrillo rides fence on a rancho that is smaller. On the map, and the same under her horse, she sees fewer antelope and more strangers, more wire and less sky. Up in the Sierra, hydraulic cannons unmake hills into ghosts. And in San Francisco, buildings go up faster than names can stick. She keeps the Riata oiled and the vouchers signed and watches her nephew start talking about law school, which is either progress or surrender, and maybe both. In Kansas, on a Sunday that smells like bread and hot canvas, Eliza and Isaiah and the Novaks sit at tables pushed together under a borrowed tent. A preacher in a coat too big for him talks about Ruth gleaning in a foreign field and Joshua drawing lines he said God drew first. After, they share cold fried rabbit and a loaf that rose anyway and pass a tin cup of coffee that tastes like friendship. The children collect bright stones and the men argue about the railroad. S-rates and the women decide who's delivering whose baby if the creek rises. A Lakota family rides the ridge and does not stop, and nobody knows a sentence to make that would make them do so without danger. The day tilts, warm and full. They stand for a hymn in a dozen accents that finds its shape on the second verse. This is the experiment. Give people land and see who they become. Some become roots, some become fences, some become wind. Some become the stories that keep other people trying when Eliza nails her patent to the dugout wall 5 springs after the day she signed the first paper. She cries like a strong person who can finally afford it. Mary traces the seal with a finger. Kit says nothing and shoulders a plough line like a man trying on his father's coat. Isaiah, too, holds a patent one morning on the stoop and takes off his hat the way a man does in a church he respects but does not always understand. Leela hangs it next to a quilt and says, "There." He looks from paper to field to sky. The wind has that smell after rain. A train whistle thrums the horizon. Somewhere, not far enough away, a herd bawls toward a pen. Somewhere too far, a treaty moves through a legislature with its pockets already full. The frontier is changing uniforms again. The next one will smell like iron and smoke and legal ink. It will travel faster and fight differently. It will ask different questions and pretend to have better answers. Asterisk Iron Roads, 1867 to 1873. Rails bite the prairie. Telegraph wires teach the sky to talk. Texas cattle surge north to Kansas rails. Towns explode, and a little barb of wire waits in a patent office, nearly ready to redraw the West. Meanwhile, mills, ranch, and homesteads pivot from surviving to selling in a country learning to move at the speed of steam. Asterisk the hammer falls in Utah, and the whole country hears it in an instant. At Promontory Summit, a golden spike kisses to rails and telegraph keys. From Omaha to Sacramento click the same word, done to a sky that just learned to talk. In stations and general stores, men lift their heads at the same second. Wives pause mid-stitch. Children hush because even they understand when history clears its throat in Oregon. Jonah Walker is mid-stroke with a crosscut when the depot agent runs to the mill porch waving a flimsy. Rails joined, he shouts, breath fogging in the cool. Leeway looks up from setting a gate on the new water wheel. Tess sets down her ledger like it's made of eggs, and Ruth, apron dusted with flour, edges closer without pretending indifference. The creek chatters, unimpressed. Water has been connecting things forever. Faster markets, Tess says, already spinning numbers. Boards south, flour east, nails west. She doesn't say what else accelerates. News, debts, trouble. She doesn't have to. Jonah hears that in the blank space between telegraph clicks, far south, on a California platform stitched with dust, Anna Maria Carrillo watches a locomotive exhale superiority. She helped drive cattle to the new railhead last spring. No more days of mud-churned wagons to the bay. No more praying over river fords with 1,000 pounds of beef behind you. Now a bell rings, a couple of grabs, and her ranch's money climbs. A board and vanishes into a timetable. She hates it a little. She loves it more. Progress, the ticket man says, flipping a punch with the air of a priest. 22 hours to Sacramento if the mountains behave. The mountains don't take orders, Anna answers, but she buys a ticket anyway. There's a lawyer in the city who reads land papers with his hand over the fee line, and a banker who may finance a new well, and maybe she will sit in a chair that moves faster than a horse without getting dusty for once. On the Kansas prairie, iron arrives to a town that wasn't on a map last summer. A depot sprouts like a rumor with a roof. Beside it, pens big enough to hold history. Joseph McCoy's stockyards in Abilene Gulp, Texas, longhorns the way fires take dry grass. From the south they come raw-boned beeves that remember Mexico. Drovers with sun-sliced faces singing distance out of their throats. Get along, little dogies. like a spell that keeps a herd together. Isaiah Green stands by the new rails at dawn, coffee steaming from a blackened pot. His sister Lila hands tin cups to drovers, who thank her in accents from Neckargatches to Mat. Eliza Pike has hauled in hay bales behind a borrowed mule and leans on a fork handle, watching the town discover the difference between quiet and profit. Never seen so many hats. Kit says, 11 going on 20, eyes wide as wagon wheels. Never seen so many appetites, Eliza says. Eyes on a saloon that sprouted overnight with a false front 2 stories high and morals 2 feet deep. She'll sell hay and carrots till the last animal noses the last plank. Then she'll get the children home before night falls and the shooting starts. The new sheriff can count bullets, but not always prevent them. Not everyone loves the drives. Longhorns carry ticks and fever that walk through fences like gossip. Farmers up county post nitrogen monoxide Texas cattle signs and back them with shotguns. Arguments about disease taste like arguments about class. One morning a line of armed men turns a herd away at the county line. The drovers swear, the cattle bull, and a few dozen head through anyway because cattle believe in momentum. Isaiah says nothing, just sells his hay to both sides at a fair price and makes a note to plant more. Abilene peaks like a fever. By the time a new railhead beckons at Newton, then Ellsworth, then Wichita, Abilene looks older than it is and pretends it was dignified all along. Dodge City will have its turn in 72, a coal-smudged grin at the edge of Buffalo country. But for now the party is here and everyone is trying to learn the steps. Iron makes some things possible and other things inevitable. On the high plains, shooters step off the trains with .50 caliber buffalo guns and a ledger where the columns read hides and dollars. In 71 and 72, the hides pile waist-high along the new tracks like pale, obscene haystacks. Bones, whitened to feed new factories back east. Meat rots in an ocean of grass where nations once followed herds and called the land by names that described wind. A hunter in a greasy cap tells Isaiah he took 3,000 in a season and acts like the number is a prayer. What's left after you're done? Isaiah asks softly. The railroad, the man says, laughing, and money. Isaiah looks toward a horizon that used to move. The wind will still be here, he murmurs. I wonder what it will sound like without them. News of the slaughter moves through camps and lodges and agencies like smoke through cottonwood leaves. Some treaties were inked last year at Fort Larimer roads closed, lands reserved, promises exchanged with solemn faces, but a treaty is only as strong as the hunger that tests it. When the buffalo go, everything rearranges at the Walker Mill. The telegraph wire hums daily now. Messages spur orders. Orders request lumber. Lumber builds stations. Stations spawn towns. Leeways crew, planes, bridge timbers until they shine and names them like daughters see the birch. Elmbakers, with that will hold strangers, deserves respect. He learns the railroad men's rhythms, their preference for oak where it isn't, needed in pine where it shouldn't be, their habit of paying on Fridays and forgetting on Saturdays, their sudden, terrible silence when a man goes under wheels. Tess signs invoices that smell like sap and ink, and she tracks a new phrase carried interest across her ledger with suspicion. The faster money moves, she tells Caleb, the more it thinks it's smarter than the people making it. Then we'll be stubborn, Caleb says, and puts his weight on a chisel until the pin slides where it belongs. The Willamette changes subtly under iron's influence. Wheat that used to slosh downriver in flatboats now rides boxcars east with a timetable and a toll. Portland's wharves stiffen into ambition. In the valley's small towns, a telegraph office shares a roof with the post and the barber shop, and a boy in a vest translates clicks into gossip with the expression of a priest hearing confessions. The walkers read the San Francisco prices on Tuesday and decide how many bushels to hold till Thursday. Feels like cheating, Jonah says. Feels like information, Tess counters. Cheating's what happens when only one side has it. In California, Anna learns a new trick from an old drought. Years earlier, 63 and 64 taught rancheros that cattle can vanish under blue skies, grass, deep back, fever, mortgages. Some neighbors turned to sheep and watched wool pay board for lean. Times, others plowed wheat, and the fields of the Central Valley turned golden in a way. The poets meant and the millers counted. Anna diversifies because the land is teaching flexibility. She keeps a core herd for pride and beef and memory, adds sheep, because Kashmir doesn't care what language you speak, and leases a bottom field to a farmer with a new plow and a talent for praying over rainfall. She rides her water like a hawk, signs papers that tie creeks to ditches to her well with a lawyer's knots. Water is the new cattle. Whoever writes its story first can name the ending. She takes the train to Sacramento and sits upright while the car rocks. The Sierras go by like a slideshow of granite opinions. She sees, for the first time, Chinese men laboring where the grade forgot to be polite faces, impassive. Shoulders making arguments to stone, a foreman's shout cracking, like a whip in two languages. These men made the iron road that now makes the ranch's money run. Later, in San Francisco's Chinatown, she buys silk thread and a tin of tea that smells like smoke and flowers, and tries not to notice the signs that say no Chinese allowed, on doors that love their dollars. Your city is a contradiction, she tells the lawyer over paper and ink. He smiles a tired smile. All cities are. Back home, a squatter tries his hand on a far pasture, innocent by his own story, calculating by Anna's. She rides up slow, hat brim low, and speaks first. Either you're lost, she says, or you're looking to be. He blusters about public lands and rights he read about on a page. She unfolds her grant, Spanish and Mexican seals like pressed flowers. Then the United States patent layered over both like a sheet of glass. You can read this, she says, friendly as a rail, or I can fetch my cousins. He squints at the paper, thinks about the cousins, and tips his hat with a mouth that didn't want to. Kansas catches fire in a new way kerosene lamps in windows of stores that didn't exist at breakfast. A player piano banging away while a cowboy with a seamstress whose stitch breaks only when she tells it to. The telegraph clicks in the corner like a cricket that knows all the verses. Newton has its wild summer, 71, fights and funerals, Ellsworth follows. Wichita says it will be different and isn't. Dodge shows up late and makes up for it. Eliza avoids town at night but goes in daylight with a list and a belief that the world is better when you look it in the eye. She walks past a lot where a man hammers boards into the shape of a bank. Next door, another man sells improved fencing from a Wagner. Strip of lath with nail points hammered through and spaced out like a bad idea. Keeps hogs out and cattle in, he promises, thumb scarred to prove it. The county fair that fall exhibits 3 variations on the theme. Men gather, laugh, bleed, and argue patent dates. Fences that remember their own lines, Isaiah says, when he and Lila pass the same booth. Huh? Or a way to forget someone else's, Eliza says. She knows what a fence means to a garden. She knows what it means to a trail. Somewhere in Illinois, a man is about to twist wire into a future. For now, on the high prairie grass, still runs to the horizon unshaved. For now, the wire will come. So will weather. Asterisk. The winter of 70 snips, ear tips, and patience. Summer 71 runs lush. Then 72 remembers droughts from stories and repeats them with conviction. The railroad hauls in hay from counties that got lucky and hauls out men who didn't. Bone. Pickers follow hide hunters, loading whitened buffalo skulls by the ton, selling them east for glue and sugar and a version of civilization that will not put those bones back. At a Sunday picnic under a borrowed tent, the community practices being 1. Czech songs braid into spirituals. A cowboy shows a homesteader's kid how to roll a rope without tangles. The preacher raises a cup and gives thanks for rain measured in inches and for neighbors measured in casseroles. In the distance, a Lakota family rides the ridge, silhouetted like a line of punctuation. A boy waves high. The eldest woman lifts a hand back. The space between them is a treaty neither knows how to write. Economies ride rails both directions. The walkers ship wheat they didn't plant a decade ago, and by a Castian stove Ruth swore they didn't need until it made bread sing. Lee. Way's mill lands a contract to frame a railroad trestle over a salmon creek, and he defends the fish, with a clause that forces a culvert big enough for dreams. If you choke water, he tells the foreman, it will teach you a lesson you won't like. Since when does a miller tell a railroad how to build? The man scoffs. Since the creek taught me manners, Leeway says, and hands over the plan. Anna's sheep shear in a clean line that rolls wealth onto a broom. She hires a Basque boy who can follow a flock through a winter storm by listening to the EUs breathe. She learns a new kind of patience from wool and a new kind of law from water court. When a distant cousin suggests leasing a corner of the ranch to a man with a new pump and big torque, she shakes her head. We don't sell the river, she says. We borrow it while it passes. In Kansas, Isaiah and Lila open a cook tent by the pens during the drive's coffee, beans, sourdough that could raise the dead. They hang a hand-lettered sign, Green's boarding cash or clean promises. Cowboys tuck napkins into shirts with a sheepishness that looks like sons remembering manners. A black drover from Texas had a sleep on his head, eyes alive, tells Isaiah about the buffalo soldiers posted west. Another man in a city coat grumbles about the cost of grease. Both pay. Both say, see you next month, like a song they believe in. Eliza, having turned 5 winters into a deed, builds taller. A frame house rises from sod like a correction. She keeps the dugout because memory belongs to the land that sheltered you, but she moves the table under a roof that doesn't shed dirt when it rains. Mary hangs a scrap of lace in the new window and calls it a curtain. Kit lays the last shingle and looks out toward a horizon that is still a dare. On a September afternoon, the telegraph stutters, bad news east to west, then a wave of worse banks. Failing, railroads overbuilt on confidence and paper, a panic rolling like a wheel without a rim. 1873 sticks in the throat of men who borrowed ahead of time and now must pay with days. In Portland, 2 mills go silent for a month. In San Francisco, a merchant blinks, too late. In Abilene, a gambler discovers luck is a lender with sharp teeth. The walkers tighten belts and hold grain. Tess watches prices shiver on the page, and chooses patience over panic. Leeway keeps the mill turning, steady planks sell slower, but bridges still need beams. Anna delays a well, sells wool, instead of buying a new ram, thanks her past self for learning to like beans. Eliza does what Eliza has always done. Plants, bakes, counts, repeats. The rails are laid now, but the West is not finished with reinvention. The next tools are waiting just off stage, the thorned fence that will redraw the prairie, the insect cloud that will erase a year, a treaty ripped by a pickaxe in the Black Hills. And towns that learn boom is just another way to say temporary. Asterisk wire. And whether 1873 to 1879, panic, patents, and plagues, barbed wire closes the open range. The Rocky Mountain locust darkens noon. Black Hills, gold, reopens war. And families from Oregon to Kansas learn which lines hold and which ones bite. Asterisk, the salesman brings a bull to the county fair. Progress, he says, patting the animal's shoulder as if it were a podium. He wears a city coat and prairie dust, a combination that promises both credit and trouble. Behind him stretches 20 yards of something new strung between cedar posts, 2 smooth wires and a third with wicked little thorns every handspan. Patented, he adds, so the crowd will know this future comes with paperwork. He slaps the bull's flank. The bull takes the dare. It lowers its head and charges the fence like an argument. The wires sing, the posts shudder, and then everyone man, bull, sky reconsiders. The bull backs away, snorting, a bead of blood on its nose like punctuation. Barbed wire, the salesman declares, lifting a painted board that reads Gliddon's, winner for the men who read their news late. Keeps cattle where you put M, and neighbors where they belong. Farmers cheer in their hats. Drovers spit and study. The horizon. Somebody mutters that God made the prairie open and men have no business quilting it. Somebody else says God also made gardens and children's legs. Eliza Pike turns the sample in her hands. The thorns bite without asking. She pictures a ring of this new idea around her kitchen garden, her haystack, the patch of corn the rabbits treat like a public square. She also pictures a line of it strung across the drawer where the trail has always passed a no to 1,000 hooves. She hands it back with a look that says both yes and maybe not yet. Isaiah Green watches from the shade with a cup of coffee. He didn't pay for because the drovers learned last year his beans were better than bullets at keeping peace around the pens. He can feel the town balancing on something sharp. Rails, money, law. A thorned fence is only a tool. It's the stories people tell about it that cut. The walkers hear barbed wire first as a rumor in Oregon letters from Kansas with pencil. Illustrations, test files under market shocks. The panic of 73 has already taught her. That money stamps its feet even faster now that rails run like nerves across the country. Prices have been skittish. Mills sit quiet some days, chewing air. Still, leeways crew, planes, bridge, timbers, and beams. Creeks need crossings, even when banks forget their manners. On a rainy Friday, a boy in a vest and serious hair telegraphs the mill, need 2,000. Feet picket and wire fence posts by month's END. Tess reads it twice, sets it on the ledger, and looks. At Jonah, we don't sell wire, she says softly. Only the wood to carry it. Jonah runs a thumb along a plank. We've always built the bones, he answers. What skin folks stretch on M is their own soul. He thinks of the Modoc News that rode up the valley earlier that year, Captain Jack. Lava beds, a war fought in black rock where bullets skip like bad words, He thinks of the world's new habit of solving old problems with new speed, and he wonders if speed is a virtue or just a costume. They cut posts anyway. Work is work and winter is winter. In Kansas, barbed wire arrives in wagons and arguments. A man can fence a section now with fewer trees than a boy can count on his fingers. The first to string it are the men with gardens and cattle pens and not enough sons to chase strays. The next are men with wheat and a memory of last year's hogs. Then the ranchers follow, because if wires are going up regardless, they might as well be the ones holding the hammer. A drift fence a mile long keeps beeves from wandering into a neighbor's fines and a marshal's bad mood. But the third fence across the mouth of a long, gentle draw, where the grass flows like green water, that one starts a war with quieter teeth. One night, wire hisses in the dark. It is a clean, decisive sound. Snip, snip, snip. 3 spans are down by dawn, and a scrap of canvas nailed to a post says gate law in a hand that means business. By noon, 2 men who sleep above a saloon and smell like the trail are in front of the judge. He has a forehead built for rectangles and a patience honed by Saturdays. The rancher argues property. The drovers argue custom. The judge argues Sunday. I'll not jail men for making a road where a town always had one, he says. And I'll not fine men for trying to keep their stock out of trouble. You'll build a gate, Mr. Strickland. Good timber. Hinges that. Don't lie. You boys will use it, or you'll find yourself building another with your own backs. Isaiah volunteers a hinge he's already forged. He helps swing the gate into its new law and nods to both sides. Roads move, he says. If you don't make them away, they'll make one of you. Eliza strings wire around a garden that used to belong to rabbits and hopes she isn't knocking on her own future's door. Kit tests the fence with a curious palm and bleeds a little. Mary threads a ribbon through one stretch and calls it pretty in a way that makes Eliza laugh and then look away. By autumn, the prairie looks different if you squint. Lines where there used to be none. Corners where someone decided the wind should learn geometry. Up the trail, drovers still bring herds to the railhead Newton this year. Ellsworth next, but they stop more often to argue, and sometimes the arguments wear badges, sometimes masks. Then the sky goes wrong. Asterisk. It's July. Heat lies flat on the grass like a cat. Work is a slow word. In the afternoon, a cloud appears to the south, low and smeared, like someone dragged a thumb across the horizon. It moves against the wind. It does not throw shadows the way honest clouds do. The sound arrives last, a susurrus-like pages turning in a book the size of God. Grasshoppers, Jana Novak says in a voice that remembers. Velk-kabilki. They come as a living weather-rocky mountain, locust by the billions, a storm with legs. They fall on fields with hunger that has no bottom. They eat the tassels off corn and the hope out of faces. They chew fence posts. For the salt of people's hands, they try paint and discover they like it. They taste the children's wooden toys for sport. Eliza beats a pan with a ladle, until the world is mostly noise, and still they come. Mary sobs, then giggles, then sobs again because the air itself feels alive against her skin. Kit wraps a scarf, tight, and drags a hopper dozer, a tin trough smeared with oil through the garden, scooping brown drifts into foul gravy. It helps in a way that makes a boy feel noble and a field look mocked. They hang wet sheets and light fires that smoke like sermons. The insects fly through anyway. By dusk, the kitchen is a refuge for things with lungs and a joke for things without. Eliza presses rag along the window sash and prays to a God she loves and a science she doesn't hang out with much. The locusts rattle the roof until it sounds like rain with teeth. By morning, their field stands shaved, stalks like whittled pencils, the garden a memory, the haystack ragged as a bad haircut. The insects lift on a wind and leave, a remnant glittering like a cheap miracle in the dirt. Eliza goes very quiet. She counts what's left of the flour. She boils coffee thin and sweetens the children with stories of her husband breaking sod with a joke for every rock, of the first winter's courage, of Sarah Harper Miller's prairie fire, and the way a family can be an island in flame. She writes to the county agent. She writes to the governor. She writes to Ruth in Oregon because a woman can ask another woman for a thing without apologizing for pride. Ruth's reply comes folded in patience and cloth. There is money that smells like a drawer, 3 sacks of wheat shipped by rail, a jar of dried apples that tastes like memory when rehydrated. There is also a letter that reads like a hand on a shoulder. Hold, eat small. Plant again as soon as you can lie to yourself enough to try. Neighbors do what they've practiced. Jana shows how to dig up potato volunteers. The hoppers somehow missed. Isaiah brings a side of beef and doesn't take cash. The town forms a committee with a name that sounds like a hymn and sends a man east to speak on their behalf. Newspapers in Boston print drawings of monstrous insects and send pity wrapped in adjectives. A week later, a train brings barrels of flour labeled charity, and the whole town tastes both gratitude and the corner of humiliation. You can't scrape off, even with your best knife. The locusts leave behind egg beds in the hard pan. The next year, incubating underfoot. Men build devices and women invent recipes. Children make a sport of crushing egg cases. Pastors declare days of prayer and the weather shrugs. By the following spring, a late freeze baptizes the ground and the hatch fails in places where chance and cold held hands. People who survived now count themselves twice alive. Eliza plants again with one eye on the far horizon and the other on a pan of seedlings in the window like a gospel.news, rides wire and hoof faster than weather. In 74, a messenger in buckskin brings a rumor that the Black Hills glitter when a soldier scratches them. In 75 and 76, the rumor becomes a crowd. Treaties folded neatly in Washington come apart under picks and tents and a hurry that pretends not to hear Lakota words for ownership and promise. Telegraph sounders stitch out fighting on the Little Bighorn, and then, hours later, Custer fallen, and towns 3 states away inhale at the same second. In saloons and parlors, maps come off. Hooks and fingers jab. Some men cheer quietly for a people who keep saying enough. Others call for more officers and fewer apologies. Isaiah closes the cook tent early that night and counts spoons with hands that remember the South's smoke. A man can admire courage on both sides, he tells Lila, and still hate the river of hurt that keeps on going. A week later, soldiers ride through. Blue coats, dusty, faces all edges. They buy coffee that tastes like common ground and leave a rumor that the Lakota will be pushed onto smaller lands and the Black Hills will be purchased like a moral at the end of a tale. Isaiah pours another cup and says nothing the wind hasn't heard. In Oregon, Jonah reads the story with his thumb holding the place. The Nez Perce War of 77 passes through the papers like a slow knife. Promises bent. A people running with dignity that time can't blunt. A long chase through Idaho and Montana and sorrow. The walkers send flour to a fort that won't keep anyone safe in a way that matters, and go back to soaring because a mill can't mourn all day and stay a mill. Anna hears the little bighorn news in San Francisco, where she's arguing with a banker whose pen writes profit into small black squares. The city feels both far from and complicit in every story these days. She returns to the rancho and rides fence. A new neighbor strings expensive wire with too tight corners and watches a storm peel it like an orange. Another floats his on cottonwood, posts set in wet clay, and watches the summer shrink his straight lines into question marks. Anna's own stretchers hold corner braced, posts tamped, wires tuned with a palm's honesty. She has never believed a thing should be trusted because it was new. A drought comes and goes like a disciplinarian, reminding California that rain is not a right. Her sheep shear thin. Her cattle look like they forgot how to dress themselves. She moves them early, leases farther, sells wool first, beef later. A cousin cuts wire on a neighbor's fence in a night-blind rage and finds himself paying a judge for the privilege of learning a lesson. The rancho stays solvent under a ledger that looks like a fence itself, one line after another, keeping more than it excludes. By 79, the country has learned the taste of wire and weather and war. The railroad strike of 77 men, laid off by telegraph and answered by militia, has left a scorch line through cities back east. Even in Kansas, a depot burns one night, and the townsfolk pray for rain that can douse fury. The buffalo are turned. 2 myths faster than grandfathers can tell the last honest numbers. A boy in Dodge City can grow up knowing the animal only as a skull someone put a geranium in. Eliza nails a final board on the new barn that smells like good decisions and pitches the old hay fork with a grin. The field beyond shows green again there. Locusts went north or nowhere. Kit's team leans sweetly into the plow. Mary ties ribbons on the new gate. And Eliza lets herself plan a winter with potatoes she grew instead of potatoes she was given. Asterisk. Isaiah signs a cooperative charter with 5 neighbors. German, Czech, a former Missourian who now remembers he hated slavery all along, and a woman who does math better than her brother. They will buy wire by the mile, posts by the rail car, flour by the ton. They will sell beef in lots big enough to make a rail agent blink. They will build a school that can argue with any weather. In Oregon, Tess adds a column to the ledger labeled TAUGHT, and under it she writes, Leeway's fish ladder keeps salmon in the creek. Fences keep cows out of the orchard. Nothing keeps the rain off on Tuesdays. Ruth laughs and adds, except a roof. Caleb sharpens a scythe and hums a tune he picked up from a drover who slept in their hayloft last summer and paid in news. Anna stands by a stretch of wire that keeps her alfalfa honest and watches the sun go down on a day that cost her nothing but attendance. Beyond the fence, open hills breathe, a little less open than the ones her father told her about. She touches the wire once, gently. The thorn pricks. You keep promises, she tells it, and I'll keep you. The bull from the fair grows, old and mean and then just old. The salesman moves on to the next county, then the next, until there are more fences than roads, and the prairie looks like somebody decided to teach it about boxes. In a museum, someday, a loop of early wire will rest in a case with a card that says, changed the West. That's true, so did weather, so did greed, so did kindness that never made a headline. Main streets and blind. Corners, 1879 to 1885, boomtowns. Grow teeth. The Earps and others make law with thin paper and thicker smoke. Chinese workers build towns and then face exclusion. Fence-cutting wars spark in drought. The first electric lights blink on overstreets that still smell like horses. The frontier shifts from wide-open spaces to crowded consequences. Asterisk, asterisk. By noon, the street looks like a parade that forgot which way the band should face. False fronts shoulder into the Sky Gem Theatre. Occidental bank names, painted with a confidence the buildings haven't earned yet. A player piano soars away. Inside a canvas-walled saloon. Outside, a bullwhacker curses his team in 2 languages. Somewhere behind the livery, a rooster argues with destiny. Boomtowns arrive like summer storms. First the wind, then the noise, then the lightning. Surviving them is mostly about knowing which doorway to step into. On one such Main Street soapstone, Arizona Territory's silver money walks in on 2 legs, and Law trails it wearing a hat too small for the job. Men with borrowed Clantons, a holiday who coughs apologies into a handkerchief practice. A new American art, making order with thin paper and thicker smoke. In October 1881, a minute and a half of gunfire at a corral becomes a myth before the bodies cool. Newspapers everywhere argue angles. Dime novelists add adjectives. The town keeps opening its doors the next morning because there's or 2 rays and beef to fry. Most law on the frontier never looks like that. It looks like a clerk with dull ink and good handwriting. It looks like a school bell. It looks like a judge's raised eyebrow and a mother's lower one. Back in Oregon, the walkers watch Main Streets bloom in miniature. The mill's new timbers. Ship out on flat cars. A courthouse rises in the county seat with a clock that insists time belongs to everyone. On an evening in 1880, the depot agent invites the town to stand in the dark and hold its breath. A man throws a lever. Arc lamps hiss awake above Maine. Horses shy, children squeal. Grown men clap like boys. Electric light carves hard-edged shadows along the boardwalks and makes sawdust on the mill floor look like gold dust. Marvel. Jonah says, not as a man given to marveling, but as one who can count. We'll soar longer in winter, or not. Ruth slips her arm through his. We've earned evenings that belong to us. Leeway walks the length of the lit street with his crew. Palm up to feel the faint heat from the lamps, eyes narrowed against the glare. Light shows what's already there, he says softly. It doesn't make it kinder. Orders hum along the telegraph. The mill frames depots and bridges. Leeway insists on fish ladders where trestles cross creeks because a town with salmon tastes like a promise. A councilman calls that fancy. Leeway brings him smoked fish on a board and says, taste your grandchildren's dinner. The motion passes. Not all lights banish all shadows. Signs sprout in mill towns and ports. Nitrogen, monoxide, Chinese painted by hands, happy to take contracts from men like Leeway and angrier to see him paid. In San Francisco, politicians learn that fear is a ladder. In 1882, Congress nails the Chinese Exclusion Act into law and calls it protection. The words slam like a door clear up the coast. A letter from a cousin in California arrives at Leeway's cabin above the mill. Paper creased, characters hurried. Work is steady, but men look at us as if we stole something of theirs by breathing. With this new law, they think they can lock us outside of what we built. Ruth answers with flower orders and a promise of rooms if cousins want to come north. The world will widen again, she writes. Until it does, we'll hold a door. Kansas learns what happens when a frontier graduates. The Chisholm and Western trails still run. But refrigeration and dressed beef move the money into boxcars with ice and brand names. Abilene boomed, then sobered. Newton had its wild summer and a long headache. Ellsworth and Wichita trade years as if taking turns with the same hat. Dodge City sharpens its grin just as Longhorns begin to thin dot at the railhead. Isaiah Green turns from feeding drovers to feeding section hands, surveyors, schoolchildren, the town itself. Green's boarding becomes Green's table. A plankroom cafe where coffee is steady and tempers aren't. He posts a chalkboard at the door. Beans, 10. Beef, 15. Pie, if Lila says so. He hangs a second sign by the till. No guns at the table. We ain't that hungry. One August dusk, the town gathers for its own electric baptism. 2 arc lamps bloom over the deeper cold suns that turn dust to glitter and make night look thin. A cowboy in from the Canadian River raises his hat and says, "It plain, that's witchcraft." Then he eats 3 plates of beans and decides witches do good work. Eliza Pike, who 5 winters ago signed her name onto a section and dared the weather to erase it, sells eggs and carrots to the cafe and carries home stories with the coins. She has fenced her garden with the new thorned wire, keeps rabbits honest, keeps Mary from trying to pet deer and put a little around the haystack too. She hasn't strung it across the drawer. Roads are the veins that keep a place alive. Drought leans on the county in 83 and 84. Wells sulk, tempers fray like cheap rope. In Texas, where wire now bites across waterholes and cuts trails into pieces, men ride at night and turn pliers into politics. Fences go down by moonlight. Sometimes men do with them. The fence gutter's war gets a name because it draws blood and headlines. In Austin, Governor Island signs a law with a heavy hand. Cutting wire becomes a felony. Fencing public roads. 2. The argument reaches Kansas in smaller, daily Wasergate left open, a hot word cooling into a fight. Isaiah stands on a porch one hot night while 2 men practice the art of getting brave with a crowd. He tells a story instead of a sermon. My father built a gate out of mismatched boards, he says. Hinges squeaked like a sermon about sin. Every man who came through oiled it a little with his own pocket grease because he wanted the next sound to be kinder. A gate is a deal you make with people you don't know yet. The deal is this: we all live here tomorrow. The crowd chuckles. The men put their shoulders down. Someone fetches oil. News moves faster than horses now, which means tragedy arrives on time. In September 1885, the telegraph clicks ugly from Wyoming. Chinese miners attacked at Rock Springs. Men murdered. Houses burned. The story spreads like a bruised cheap talk about wages, a strike, a spark, and then the worst part. How easy it is to find a crowd to carry a flame. Isaiah reads the notice with hands that tighten on the paper. Lila, who keeps the cafe's back room as a lending library, pulls down a Bible and leaves it open on a psalm that holds anger in one hand and mercy in the other. In Oregon, Liway folds the newspaper in half and stares at the white space under the story as if it can answer him. Ruth brings tea. We keep making the circle bigger, she says. That's the job. Anna Maria Carrillo hears in San Jose that same week from a wool merchant who tuts sympathy between prices. She rides home angry at a world that thanks labor with doors shut and fists open. On her rancho, Chinese shearers laugh at a joke in Cantonese. A Basque boy pretends to understand, and the clip rolls out clean as a sentence that says stay. Anna has other problems the law can't fix with ink. A silver town to the east coughs and wheezes as ore plays out. A banker smiles with too many teeth. A canal company discovers a right to water that her great-grandfather used when it still had a Spanish name. She rides to the hearing with papers in a leather folder and cousins on both sides. The commissioner has a face that didn't earn its authority outdoors. Anna lays the old grants on the table, then the Mexican reaffirmation, then the United States patent. We obeyed 3 flags, she says evenly. None of them ask the river what it thinks. The ruling is a compromise that tastes like sawdust. Her ditch still flows, but less in August. And the cousin who sold paper to a company in town learns how promises make poor fences. Anna rides home uneasy and checks a headgate with her own hand because words can take months to fix and water can kill a crop in a day. Meanwhile, the myth of the West keeps writing itself with gunsmoke and music. In 1883, the Dodge City War makes headlines for a quarrel about who gets to run the saloon, and the ERPs ride in for a photograph more famous than the meeting it recorded. A pull-out rail spur moves the stockyards down the line. Dodge frowns at its reflection and decides to keep its nickname anyway. On Saturdays, the sidewalks look like a parliament that forgot to adjourn. Germans and Czechs in their Sunday shirts buying nails. Black Teamsters slapping dust from their hats. A Lakota family riding through, silent, proud, not staying. 2 railroad men counting ties in their heads. A woman in a temperance sash writing down saloon names in a little notebook. Like a spell she intends to cast on Tuesday at council. Eliza stands with Mary at the window of the New Notions, store glass jars of peppermint, spools of thread, a display, card of pearl buttons so bright you could mistake them for coins. Pick 2, Eliza says, feeling rich. Mary chooses 3 and then nimbly puts one back because she's learned that thrift feels better when it's voluntary. Asterisk. On a different main street, farther west, a telephone line goes up between the newspaper office and the courthouse, 2 blocks of copper nerve. Boys stand below and imitate operators. Ahoy, can you hear me now? The real operator. A girl with her hair pinned with alarming geometry wipes her hands and places to grown men in the same conversation with a flick of her wrist. The future has a woman's hands, a bystander murmurs, without irony. By 1885, the West is full of corners you can't see around until you turn them. Some are good as schoolhouse bell, a cooperative seed order that arrives on time, a new doctor with clean instruments and better ideas. Some are meaner bankers' thin smile, a drought that repeats on purpose, a judge who doesn't hear accents. The same the Walker's town adds a reading room. Leeway shelves a copy of the new state constitution beside an almanac and a book of poems. Some lagers read to each other when they think nobody is looking. Tess persuades the council to fund a footbridge where children have been wading and pretending not to fall. The vote is close because stinginess calls itself prudence in public. After the bridge goes up, nobody remembers it was ever controversial, which is how progress usually wins. Isaiah's cafe starts serving supper to railroad men who would otherwise drink it. He hires a girl who can fry chicken and deflect propositions with the same hand. He hires a boy who stutters and then stops stuttering when the pastry comes out right. He hangs a framed photograph behind the till, not of a gunman but of a prairie school class, the day they got their first globe. Eliza's farm grows, not just crops, but habits. Fix harness before it breaks, put cash in an envelope marked winter. Say yes when the neighbor asks to borrow the team, if the neighbor has ever said yes to you. On a Sunday, when the wind is kind, the women organize a sewing circle that finishes 3 quilts and a political opinion. We have votes in the kitchen and in the pews, the Ohio widow says, and we spend them every week, out on the rancho. Anna watches her nephew return from the city with a law book and an argument in his throat. He wants to file something important against someone important. She hands him a post-hole digger. "Help me set this corner," she says. After an hour of honest earth, his voice finds a better tone. "Now," she tells him, "say it again." In Arizona, the Earps leave town. Tombstone keeps it silver until water and law and deeper or take too much time. In Wyoming, Rock Springs buries its dead. In Kansas, the wire holds through another winter and sags in spring where boys sat it like a swing. In Oregon, arc lamps hiss, a salmon runs. A mill whistle calls men to work on time and home for supper. You could say the frontier is over if by frontier you only mean distance and silence. But the blind corners remain new technology with old biases, laws that need hands to make them fair, whether with its own vote. The map has more names on it now. The people finally have to live up to theirs. Asterisk die-up and dividing lines. 1886 and 1890. A killer winter drops the open range to its knees. The Detours Act breaks nations into acres. The ghost dance spreads across hungry reservations, and a cannon coughs at Wounded Knee. Meanwhile, Oklahoma's prairie turns into a starting line. Asterisk, the first storm walks in politely and sits on the horizon like it means to stay out of the way. The second forgets its manners. The third brings knives. By Christmas of '86, the northern plains are a single thought in white. Wind sides, the grass flat, and then keeps cutting. Cattle drift before it, as they were born to do, until the new barbed fences catch them like combs' black backs, jammed in drifts that climb the wire and keep on going. Men ride with scarves frozen to their mouths, speaking only when a word can save a life. And even then they try not to waste it. A teenage cowboy out of Texas, hat too big. Heart 2 leans low to cut a strand so a bunch can pass through and live. The wire sings like a struck saw and bites him anyway. By dawn, the strand is a line of ice. The cattle beyond it, a heap of breathing that gets quieter. He ties his pony to a cottonwood and walks upwind until he finds a bluff where the snow has gone thin. He starts a fire that has no business catching and feeds it every stick his pride can spare. January opens like a clenched fist. The die-up begins to words that make a whole industry flinch. From the Canadian River to the Yellowstone, the open range learns what hubris costs when the sky is in a mood. In February, a thaw cheats everyone into hoping. In March, a sweet rain falls and then freezes on the ground like a prank. A cow in calf will lie down if she can't find windbreak. A man who loves that cow will go hoarse trying to make her stand. In Kansas, Isaiah Green hears the news in the way he now hears everything. Between mouthfuls, at Green's table, a section hand says there's a drift against a wire in the Texas panhandle taller than the church steeple. A freighter coming down from Ogalla counts carcasses by the mile and looks old by the end of the sentence. 2 cowboys eat as if it's a test and then stare at their second plates like they forgot what food is for. Coffee's hot, Isaiah says, because this is the most useful thing a man can offer to grief. Leela refills cups with a hand that shakes once and then remembers how to be steady. Eliza Pike finds 3 dead steers along the north fence after a night that cracked the water. bucket on the sill. She and Kit haul them to a hollow and stack bones cleanly, because respect isn't complicated. Next fall, more hay, she says, which is a plan and a prayer. And the cows behind a windbreak when the sky looks like an argument. By April, the snow gives up all at once, and the plains smell like a tannery. The survivors stumble out of willow bottoms with ribs like barrel hoops and eyes that apologize for being alive. Bankers who thought the open sky guaranteed profits suddenly learn the math of forgiveness. In Cheyenne and Miles City, ranch hands stand in doorways with their hats in their hands and look at their boot tips the way a man looks at a grave. Some drift to town, some drift to wheat. A few drift home to states where grass grows between rocks and fences look friendlier. When the cow outfits rebuild, they do it smaller and smarter. Winter pasture under wire, hay ricks stacked high as a farmer's. A pinyon, windbreaks planted in rows of Russian olive and cottonwood that will turn a blizzard into a suggestion. The era of 1,000,000 head under one brand has been taught humility by a season that didn't take attendance. Asterisk, that same winter, another kind of cutting begins with ink. In February of 1887, Congress passes the Dawes Severalty Act and congratulates itself on understanding people like property. Reservations will be surveyed and divided. Heads of household will receive 160 acres, singles less. The surplus opened to settlers who weren't invited by anyone who lived there first. Agents speak of citizenship like a gift wrapped around a loss. Reformers talk about civilizing as if plows are prayers. Surveyors unfold maps across rooms where grandparents remember rivers by their sound, not by lines. A Lakota man named Red Star sits at a wooden table in an agency building that smells like old coffee and policy. The agent reads from a sheet the color of dust. "Sign here to receive your allotment," he says, and the interpreter translates in a voice that wishes it could refuse. Red Star looks out the single window toward a prairie learnt in circles and shakes his head. "How do you eat a fence?" he asks quietly. The interpreter does not translate the question because there isn't a safe way to say it. Eliza watches a small party of Lakota riders pause on the ridge above her claim one morning in March. They used to pass weekly, silent and sovereign eyes. On distances the rest of the town couldn't see. Lately she sees them less. Rumor says agents are counting heads and acres. Rumor says surplus means what it always means, what other people want. She stands a respectful moment in her yard, hat in her hands. A woman who knows something about papers and nothing about what it costs to have your country explained to you. School terms change along with the lines. A missionary brings news of a boarding school back east where boys get haircuts that feel like erasures and uniforms that itch like new names. Kill the Indian, save the man, the founder says with the confidence of a person who has never wondered whether he needs saving. A grandmother in a log house on the Missouri River cuts her own hair in grief and ties it in a rag. She keeps it in the bottom of a trunk where she can find it when a letter arrives with the school seal and a tone that calls theft, charity, the ghost. Dance comes like rain after a dry summer, a hope spoken in circles. In 1889, a Paiute visionary named Vovica says he saw the world cleaned of its meanness, the buffalo returning, the ancestors smiling, the dead not so far away. The dance itself is simple hands joined, feet measuring the ground into something gentle, songs that make space in the chest for old grief to move around. On reservations across the plains, people who have been told to stand still for too long. begin to move in circles again. They sew shirts with symbols that make sense to them and are ridiculous to men who fear anything they don't own. They dance hungry. They dance hopeful. They dance the way prayers dance when they are tired of forced sitting. Newspapers do what they do when they're paid in fear. Print sketches of messiahs and war shirts and uprisings. Agents telegraph for troops because panic is an office skill. In December 1890, at Standing Rock, police come for Sitting Bull and leave with a legend and 6 dead men in the dust. A band of mini-conju, led by Big Footsick with fever, flags of truce tied to hope heads south through snow toward Pine Ridge, toward safety that has forgotten its definition. Soldiers of the 7th Cavalry catch them at Wounded Knee Creek on December 28th and 29th. Hotchkiss guns squat on a low rise like arguments that won't entertain rebuttal. The night is bitter. The wagons ring the camp. The air carries a smell of metal and fear. Morning brings confusion, a shot, the jerk of a blanket, a rifle catching the light, and then a roar that has the shape of forever. By noon, the creek bed is full of bodies, many of them women and children. A baby is found days later under a mother. Who took the word shield and made it into work? The papers call it a battle because massacre is heavier than ink. Some of the men with shoulder straps call it a necessity because sleep is easier if you lie well. 20 medals of honor are handed out as if valor could paper over aim. Snow falls and then drifts and then melts. And when the grass comes back, in spring it does not know how to stop growing around that place. The ghost dance quiets not because it was wrong, but because the people who needed it most have run out of safe places to move. Isaiah reads the story on a Monday afternoon with his thumb pressed white on newsprint. He closes the cafe early and stacks chairs. Lila lights a lamp and does not speak. Eliza folds her hands and sits by the stove until the coals stop pretending to be coals and admit they're cold. In Oregon, Leeway sets down a plane and looks at the creek as if it can answer a question with water. Ruth bakes a loaf and sends half to a widow with no appetite for bread or anything else. Between these griefs, another race is planned with optimism sharp as a spike. The unassigned lands in Indian Territory, carved out by treaties that read like Risetsa surveyed, intersections and quarter sections, and the government decides to pretend this is fair by starting a competition. April 22nd, 1889, noon sharp. A cannon shot 2 million acres of prairie turning into lines on paper as fast as horses can run. At the southern border, the starting line is a county of wagons. Plow behind contraptions with wheels to narrow. Spring buggies loaded with water barrels. Men on mules. Women with their hair braided down their backs and jaws set to prove it. Flags bob above family names painted on canvas. Hernandez, Schmidt. BROW. Unwhile a preacher walks the line, reminding God he is a witness. A boy counts seconds aloud, and nobody tells him to hush because the sound keeps their lungs honest. Boomers, someone says, and spits a name for men who've been agitating to open this land for years. Sooners, someone else mutters, pointing toward a stand of cottonwoods where a glimpse of canvas suggests cheating already in progress. Isaiah's nephew Levi, 20 and believing in the constructive power of speed, sits a rangy sorrel and tries not to vibrate his saddle apart. He has a claim staked in his head already. Creek on the west, a rise enough for a house to look at the sunrise from, a patch of bottom so black he can hear corn laughing. He carries a shovel, a coffee pot, and a letter from his mother that says, "Bring me a deed, or bring me your ears open to reason." The cannon coughs. In an instant the horizon is dust and noise, a school of fish with wheels, a prayer meeting with reins. The sorrel lunges, ears flat, choosing the gaps he would have chosen even if Levi hadn't. A buggy tipped by a rut becomes a sermon about wheel width. A man on foot sprints with a stake over his shoulder, grin wide and already sore. A woman in a calico dress drives a mule team like she was born to argue with gravity. A mile in, Levi looks left and sees a black family pacing him in a wagon with brand new boards and old eyes. The father nods once, Levi nods back. A rumor runs that some folks mean to build an all-black town out here, Langston, they'll call. It turned teach respect into the dirt. By dusk, the prairie is freckled with sheets, flags, and the posture of possession. Arguments start like campfires. Sooner is the nastiest word anyone can throw without losing a friend forever. A deputy with a borrowed badge rides past and promises a court tomorrow. Tonight, he suggests nobody try to make justice with a stove lid. Levi scratches his stake into ground that feels both his and not. The creek gurgles its indifference. He drinks from a bucket with his hat and laughs like a man who just used up all the good luck he brought. In the morning, a man on a grey horse rides up and says, "I was here yesterday." Levi hears himself say, "So was I," and then hears his mother's letter in his head. "Let's check the map together," he adds, and the day improves. They end up with a fence line drawn in words and a promise to share the first threshing machine that reaches this far. Back north, Eliza's farm keeps its rhythms milking before light, fence mending in the long afternoons, bread cooling on a sill that knows the weight of a good day. Kit reads about the land run by Lamp and admits he's a little jealous of people who get to do a hard thing fast. "We did ours slow," Eliza says, and doesn't apologize. Mary sews a ribbon into her hat and wonders out loud whether a school in the new towns will need a teacher who can make numbers behave. Anna Maria Carrillo hears about the run at the rail depot, where men who have never loved a piece of earth shout staking stories like fishing stories, arms wider with every telling. She smiles because the land will break these men in all the usual ways, gently if they're lucky. Her own rancho is smaller on paper and the same under her horse. Fences hold, ditches run. A nephew studies law and learns to say riparian without laughing in the summer of 1890. Census men fold their tables and pencils and send a sentence down the wire that tastes like a period. The superintendent writes that there is no longer a discernible frontier line. The map's empty spaces now cluttered with dots and names and claims. Newspapers call it the closing of the frontier because they like tidy endings. Eliza sets a pan of biscuits on the table and thinks, lines on paper don't stop wind. Isaiah serves stew to railroad hands who just moved a town 2 miles west because water won the argument. In Oregon, the Walker mill whistle still calls men at 6 and sends them home at 6, and nobody thinks the forest is finished with them. Leeway walks to the creek, rests a hand on the wet stones of a fish ladder, and watches salmon leap exactly where a plan said they could. Anna rides fence at dusk and hears frogs, a coyote, and a distant trainer choir rehearsing something new. If a line on a census map has closed, it closed like a gate you build with care, on hinges that squeak unless everyone bothers to oil them, with a latch that needs eyes more than it needs locks, with a path worn under it already because people were never going to stop coming and going. And beyond the gate, towns with lights, laws with blind spots, schools with bells, rooms where the future sits on a bench swinging its feet, waiting for somebody to notice it's here. Asterisk the line on the map 1890 and after. The census declares. The frontier closed, but Sarah Harper hears the news on a Kansas platform and decides that's only a change in vocabulary. Railroads, telephones, and schools knit what used to be edges. The Harper Walker world passes on a toolkit stubbornness, neighbor sense, and the habit of building to a century ready to sprint. Asterisk, they say, the frontier closes in the summer of 1890, but the wind does not sign anything on a Kansas platform. Sarah Harper hears the news the same way everyone else does second-hand through a depot agent with a telegram in his fist, and a voice that likes pronouncing eras. She has flour on her sleeve and pride in her throat, because Lucy is leaving on the morning train with a valise that smells faintly of soap and ambition. The locomotive hisses. The town turns its face to the sound like a sunflower to heat. Census says, the frontier's gone. The agent announces, as if he's handing out a fact that will change the weather. Sarah looks at the rails, snapping sunlight, and at her daughter's eyes, wide and bright. Things that real don't disappear with a sentence, she says, and kisses Lucy's cheek. Go learn what the books know. Bring home what they forgot. Daniel jogs up late, coat flapping, a coil of telephone wire slung like a lariat over his shoulder. He smells faintly of linseed and lightning. Didn't miss it, he pants, and doesn't he folds his daughter into a hug big enough for a generation. The conductor lifts a gloved hand. The bell strikes. Lucy climbs aboard with a last look that says, I will be fine because you were tough first. The train leaves. The dust falls. The town exhales. And still the wind moves where it pleases. Asterisk. In Oregon, the Walker mill whistle carries news like a crier. Frontier closed, says the headline tacked to the post office door, as though the map were a room that finally ran out of corners. Jonah reads it, folds the paper, and tips his hat. To Leeway, who's checking the fish ladder where the creek learns to climb. Closed. Jonah snorts, tapping the boards at his feet. Tell that to an empty granary in March, or a broken axle in rain. Lines comfort those who draw them. Leeway says, watching salmon flash silver where the water lifts. The fish do not ask permission of ink. Tess adds a new column to the ledger labeled Promises Kept and fills it with small items wages on time. Timber milled straight, creek run clear not, because they will make it into books, but because without them books don't happen. Arc lamps hum over Maine. The telegraph clacks incessantly. Somebody in the back of the barbershop insists that within 10 years a man will speak in Portland and be heard in San Francisco without wires. And next you'll tell me the rain will start landing where we want it, Jonah says, grinning. The winter of 93 brings the panic like a wolf at the door. Prices fall hard enough to rattle crockery. Mills elsewhere go quiet. A few banks fell loudly. The Walker crew tightens its belts without drama. Ruth stores beans that will be there in February and kindness that will be there when February is a memory. They keep sawing. Bridges still need beams even when men argue about silver versus gold in halls. Sarah's generation will never visit Dot in California. The rancho changes slowly, the way a riverbed changes one flood at a time. The Right Act has given irrigation. Districts' teeth and canals multiply like sentences in a lawyer's brief. Anna Maria Carrillo rides her headgates at dawn, pencil and pocket watch ready, counting seconds like a banker counts coins. The alfalfa is green as envy. The sheep clipped quick. The cattle grow with a dignity they forgot during the drought. A Young engineer with hair too neat to be strictly honest arrives with a rolled blueprint that promises water where the map says maybe. Anna hears him out, signs what is smart, refuses what smells like fever, and loans a neighbor money at terms kinder than banks, because people remember the shape of a fair hand longer than they remember the number that a county seat. A judge in a chalcolard coat bangs his gavel over a question that would have puzzled Anna's grandfather, whose right is older, the one written in Spanish on calfskin, the one stamped in English on parchment, or the one carried for generations in saddle and song. The answer, as always, is it depends, and everyone's lawyer will go home half mad. Anna wins enough to keep the ditches singing. In San Francisco, she sits under a chandelier and tastes electric, light as if it were a spice brilliant, a little sharp on the tongue. In Chinatown, she buys tea in silk and hears the anger that followed the 1882 Exclusion Act, spoken in the kind of quiet that means it isn't over. She hires Chinese shearers openly and Basque herders gladly and keeps her ranch's politics clear. If you put your back into the work, the ranch will put its shoulder behind you. Kansas has settled into its new costume wire and windmills, schools, and Saturday markets, but it still trips on its hem sometimes. At Green's table, Isaiah hangs a placard that reads "No talk of silver until you've finished your pie." It's not that he doesn't care about the People's Party, their talk about freight, rates and loan sharks sounds like sense to a man who has signed both sides of allegiates that men shout politics louder with sugared courage, and Isaiah will not have plates broken for a fight that will never end. He joins the Grange, votes his bargains, and starts a cooperative with 5 neighbors who know how to argue without leaving. They order seed together, sell steers in lots, and take turns sharpening the community saw. Lila opens a reading shelf, Harper's, the Topeka capital, a novel or two that make the boys sit straighter without understanding why. Eliza Pike's garden glows behind its modest wire. Mary teaches at the new school, fingers forever inked with other people's futures. Kit marries a woman who can stack hay straighter than he can. Eliza blesses the Union as both romance and farm policy. A telephone line goes up between the depot and the mercantile. The operator, a girl who takes no nonsense, connects people who haven't spoken in years and enjoys the power of it without misusing it. The winter brings sleet and a memory of '86 in the way stock turn their backs to the north. This time there is hay stacked under thatch, a windbreak of willow and cedar, and a neighbor who has learned to open gates for the herd that's not his. Loss still visits. It does not empty the county. Levi, the nephew who raced the 1889 line into Oklahoma, builds a windmill that makes water say yes more often than no. His house grows from a tent to a dugout to a frame. He learns to plant for this soil, not the one his father spoke of. To pray for rain like a man who will also dig. To be decent to Sooners who become neighbors because there is no other kind. That lasts. On Sundays, he rides to a church that is also a school and a voting hall. And on weeknights he studies law in a book so thick it could chock a wagon. He visits Langston and Al Blacktown, born of loud hope, and buys seed and respect, in equal measure. The people there are making a place that assumes dignity from the start. He eats a plate of catfish on a porch and listens to a sermon about Moses that slides neatly into a lecture on fence law. Farther north and west, the headline from Wounded Knee leaves a bruise that does not fade. The ghost dance has quieted under the weight of grief, but the song doesn't vanish. It changes key, travels inside people where paper can't reach. On some reservations, The new allotment fences stand sharp against a sky that never promised corners. In agency schools, boys wear haircuts that erase their uncles, and girls sew aprons they did not ask for. Some policies are nudged by kind hands. Others cut on purpose. Sarah keeps a cedar chest under the bed. On a winter afternoon in '92, when Lucy boards the eastbound, Sarah takes out what the family has decided to keep: a wooden spoon carved by a great-grandfather who guessed wrong about one spring and right about the next, an iron cooking pot from Isaiah's first freight outfit, seasoned by camps that were half hope and half beans, a fish-shaped iron nail leeway hammered flat the day the salmon leaped where the ladder said they could, a length of rawhide from Ana's father's riata that still remembers the shape of a horse's neck. These are not treasure so much as tools that learned memory. At the bottom of the chest lies a patent folded soft by Yisbelisses, the government seal still pretentious in the corner. Mary has traced the flourishes with a fingertip so often, she could probably sign a clerk's name better than the clerk did. When the chest is open, the house smells like cedar, smoke, coffee, and something Sarah would call stubborn if a scent could be named. Daniel brings the telephone into the kitchen. The way a man brings in a board useful, a little self-conscious. Pick it up and ask for the depot, he tells Sarah. She does. The operator says, Mrs. Miller, with a smile you can hear. The wire hums between them like a fence tuned correctly, not for keeping out, but for holding up. The 1893 Cherokee. Strip run rolls across the papers like Dacia, Buchanan, dust, arguments. Levi goes again, not because he wants more land so much, as because he wants better boundaries. A creek that won't lie, and a road that will stay, where a map says. He comes back with a deed, and a respect for the fact that luck is a skill too. The panic of 93 tightens belts. Green's table serves more stew and fewer steaks. Isaiah quietly lets receipts slide for men who have paid him with honesty for years. The mill in Oregon slows, then steadies. Tess schedules work in long, deliberate breaths. Anna holds wool off the market a week longer than the anxious would, and gets enough more to make the ledger lean the right way. Lucy returns from Chicago with a diploma and a new habit of arranging thoughts before saying them. She teaches in a whitewashed schoolhouse with a bell that used to belong to a train. She brings maps, microscopes, and a tone that makes arithmetic behave. In spring, she organizes a field trip to the depot to watch the operator tap a message east and read the reply as if it were a comet. The children gasp like witnesses. That, she tells them, is how far your voices can go if you build the right roads. On nights when the wind is kind, the town unrolls a canvas wall on Main and projects magic lanterns slides Niagara. The Brooklyn Bridge, trains in snow, a prairie sunrise that looks like this place and every place. Old men nod. Young couples hold hands without looking. A boy from a Lakota family who sometimes camps on the ridge stands at the back with his father, watching picture light fall on a street where horses still set the pace. Where's the frontier? Someone asks, half joking, as the show ends. All these rooms, Sarah says, gesturing, the school, the mill, the cafe, the church, the blacksmith, the new library shelf, the tangle of telephone wire against the sky, and the people inside. Them doing new things on old ground. You can circle a date on the calendar and write frontier closed in all caps, and that will be useful to men who need chapters. The people who lived the paragraphs keep going. They plant windbreaks because they remember 86. They stack hay because the sky is nobody's employee. They write irrigation bylaws that assume neighbors will be neighbors. They organize a cooperative and then let people join it who didn't. Vote for it, because grudges don't plow straight. They build a footbridge where children used to slip and call it the smart thing instead of government. They argue freight rates and fence laws, then bring a ladder when a barn roof needs shingles because some corners stay round or the map is a lie. On Christmas Eve of 1899, a storm moves in on cat feet and then remembers its job. Sarah's parlor fills with people who like each other and a few who are practicing. Isaac and Leela bring a pie that refuses to slice evenly. Eliza arrives with pickles no one can replicate. Levi bounces Mary's baby on his knee and tells the child about a windmill that made a well decide to be generous. A telegram arrives from Oregon Ruth's handwriting, as neat as winter stars. Salmon ran good. Bring that baby west someday. A letter follows from Californiana's nephew, now a lawyer with dust on his boots. We won a small case big enough to matter. The creek says hello. Daniel strings a wire for a party trick, and after a lot of chair scraping connects the parlor telephone to the depot. The operator, in on the joke, rings back. He sets the handset down on the table like a candle that talks. Say something to the new century, he tells the room. Lucy clears her throat. She looks at her mother, at the patent on the wall, at the spoon in the chest, at the hands scarred and capable around the room. We're here, she says into the mouthpiece, simple as a stone. We'll make it better. No one outside. That room hears it. The wind moves where it pleases, and the wire buzzes once as if it approved. Outside, the snow remembers how to be beautiful as well as dangerous. Inside, people pass the pot and the bread and the baby and a set of tools no census can count. Stubbornness used kindly. The habit of building, the reflex to make a gate, not a wall. The sense that a road is a deal between strangers who intend to be neighbors. Maps fill in, edges blur. If a line on paper closes, it closes like a hingement, not to stop movement, but to guide it. The next century will sprint steel, taller than trees, light brighter than stars, machines that swallow distance without chewing. The kit the frontier leaves behind is basic and sufficient. Share the shovel, sharpen the saw, oil the hinge, tell the truth, try again. The rest is weather and timing, and somewhere west of the schoolhouse. Just beyond the last neat streetlight, the grass still leans. When the wind goes by, and you can hear the old road whisper, "Come on, then. Let's see what you'll make." Asterisk.